Chapter 121, Sect Martial Arts Competition. Jiang Li's main body was rushing. The sword cultivator clone and his 4 junior brothers and sisters rode their swords along the way, but they returned to the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak faster than him. The Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, as its name suggested, consisted of 5 steep mountain peaks that reached into the clouds. The 5 mountain peaks were exquisite, like 5 sharp swords that pierced through the clouds. The clouds and mist that coiled around the mountain peak, no matter from which angle, made the mountain terrain look majestic and imposing. The sight was extremely awe-inspiring. Anyone who looked at them would undoubtedly think that they were 5 immortal mountains. With Jiang Li's current knowledge, he was even able to discern that these 5 mountains were each situated above the positions of the 5 elements, and they relied on each other to directly form an enormous natural formation. No wonder it was said that the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak was impregnable. Such a natural array formation used the 5 spiritual mountains as the array cores. How could it be possible for humans to break it? After returning to Shu Mountain, as Jiang Li had guessed, they conducted a series of checks on his Tao foundation and soul. However, this was the power of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra. If this was the incarnation of that mighty figure, it would be impossible to tell even if one had cultivated to the golden immortal realm. Although Jiang Li's understanding of the Heart Sutra was only superficial, no one in the current cultivation world had ever heard of a cultivator successfully ascending to the immortal realm, and practically no one had the ability to see through his parallel mind. With just the 2 core formation elders, they were still far from being able to see through Jiang Li's clone. In fact, after he displayed his cultivation level and his initial awakening of the sword heart, no one doubted him anymore. They only believed that the clone had benefited from a disaster and that he had awakened his sword heart after surviving the calamity. Therefore, after his identity was verified, the sect paid even more attention to him. Because of his memory loss, they directly opened up all the spell techniques for foundation establishment and below, allowing him to study them for 2 months. During this time, whatever the clone learned became Jiang Li's as well. 2 days later, Jiang Li landed at the entrance of the scripture storage valley. Under the influence of the illusion array, the huge valley looked desolate and barren from the outside. He did not immediately enter the scripture storage valley, but first found a hidden place and dragged out the dying dragon tortoise. Jiang Li did not want to expose the existence of the coffin, so he could only trouble himself like this. However, this dragon tortoise's vitality was really tenacious. 2 days ago, it was already beaten to the point of near death by him. He did not expect that it was still alive now. Slowly, Jiang Li dragged the 50-meter-long dragon tortoise closer to the entrance of the scripture storage valley. After he took out the inner sect disciple token, a hole was immediately opened in the defensive formation. Jiang Li easily stepped in, and the scene before his eyes became a familiar and flourishing cultivation sect. Senior brother Jiang Li, welcome back. When the 2 registered disciples verified Jiang Li's identity, their eyes were completely focused on the dragon tortoise, afraid that this huge thing would wake up and give them a bite. However, Jiang Li did not mind. Originally, outer sect disciples in the Qi refinement realm did not have the ability to take on important duties like guarding the sect entrance. However, this mission required a long period of exposure to the sun and wind. There was not much to gain, so the precious inner sect disciples were not willing to sacrifice themselves. Therefore, the inner sect disciples thought of a method. They built an elegant small building not far from the entrance of the valley. On the pretext of holding down the fort inside, they would issue missions and let outer sect disciples at the late-stage Qi refinement realm or registered disciples of the Internal Affairs Hall take up the missions. They would take over the duties under the scorching sun and rain. This kind of strategy that had its own assurance and countermeasures was not a big deal. As long as it did not affect the execution of the mission, the sect would not say anything. After completing the test, the 2 of them bowed and sent him off. Jiang Li nodded and walked towards the inner area of the sect. However, he had only taken a few steps when he stopped. He waved his hand and summoned the two disciples guarding the door over. "What's going on over there?" Jiang Li pointed into the distance. In the sky above the sect, a huge platform about 100 meters in length and width floated. That thing seemed to be a floating spell arena, but wasn't the outer sect competition over already? What was the sect doing? "Senior brother, that's the stage for the sect martial arts competition," a disciple respectfully replied. "When was the sect martial arts competition decided? How could I not know?" The sect martial arts competition was naturally a martial arts competition between the entire sect's various halls. It was a grand event between inner sect disciples, and it was no longer a competition between outer sect disciples. However, Jiang Li was slightly surprised. Why had he not heard of such an important matter before? The disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall were all hot-blooded. This should be the most exciting thing to them. No one had mentioned it in the hall before. "Senior brother, the martial arts competition was said about half a month ago. I think it's said that they're holding a martial arts competition in the sect to select excellent disciples for the distribution rights of a mystic realm." Half a month ago. At that time, Jiang Li had already left the Demon Vanquishing Hall's base and was traveling alone in the wilderness. No one would specially use a communication spirit stone to inform a mid-stage Qi refinement realm disciple to participate in this kind of martial arts competition. Therefore, Jiang Li was unaware of this matter. The distribution rights of the mystic realm. However, when he heard this reason, Jiang Li recalled some things. His master, Elder He, had already left the sect for several months. Later on, he learned from his conversation with Liu Mulin that he seemed to have gone out to develop a new mystic realm. Many important figures in the sect, including eldest senior brother Chu Yunxuan, also went over to help. Other than that, the people from the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, Benevolent Travel Temple, and 100 Tempering Mountain were also present. They had all shown great interest in that mystic realm. In fact, the news that his clone was still alive was also obtained from Chu Yunxuan by the elder stationed there. At that time, he had heard that the mystic realm seemed to have quite a lot of benefits, and the distribution method was still undecided. It was said that due to the awkward geographical location of the mystic realm, it affected more than half of the sects in the Great Mountain region. Countless high-level cultivators were wrangling there. From the looks of it now, the distribution method should have been set. It was planned to be decided by the competition between the disciples of the various sects. Jiang Li thanked the two disciples guarding the entrance, leaving the two registered disciples feeling overwhelmed by the treatment. He dragged the huge dragon tortoise back to the Demon Vanquishing Hall. All along the way, when those outer sect disciples saw this giant beast, they were terrified to the point their legs and stomachs trembled, and all of them hid far away and did not dare approach. In the crowd, Lu Qianqian, Qianfen, Wang Liyuliang, and others who were familiar with Jiang Li also saw this scene. While they were afraid, they also had mixed feelings. Not long ago, they were all outer sect disciples. In fact, Qianfen and Wang Liyuliang had high-grade spiritual root aptitudes. They had even felt superior in front of Jiang Li. However, Jiang Li's cultivation suddenly advanced by leaps and bounds. In that accident, he surpassed everyone in the outer sect and was the first to enter the inner sect. Later on, their interactions ended. Their small group wanted to work hard to try and enter the inner sect to be on equal footing with Jiang Li again. However, seeing this scene made their hearts tremble. The gap between the inner sect and the outer sect, was it really that big? Jiang Li had only joined the inner sect for a few months, yet he was able to hunt such a terrifying monster by himself. Did they really still have any hope of catching up? Jiang Li did not care about the worship of the outer sect disciples. He dragged the heavy beast and entered the Demon Vanquishing Hall with ease. What entered his sight was the familiar Demon Vanquishing Hall square. At this moment, the square was bustling with training disciples. Almost all the disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall that Jiang Li could name were present. Many new faces that he usually did not see were also sweating on the field as they practiced their cultivation methods. The 10 arenas of the Demon Vanquishing Hall were also fully occupied. The intense battles above were to their heart's content, and spell techniques and artifacts were unleashed continuously. However, in Jiang Li's eyes at this moment, those battles were already no different from children fighting. The disciples in the hall were especially interested in cultivating during this period of time. Clearly, they were extremely enthusiastic about this sect martial competition. Of the 12 inner sect halls in the Scripture Storage Valley, the Demon Vanquishing Hall was probably the most enthusiastic about this matter. They usually liked to exchange pointers when they were free. Now that they had the chance to display their muscles in front of the entire sect, and even the entire cultivation world of the Great Mountain region, how could they not be excited? Jiang Li walked into the Demon Vanquishing Hall and instantly attracted the gazes of most people. The dragon tortoise that was nearly 50 meters long was simply too conspicuous. However, Elder He often captured demonic beasts to teach disciples in the past. They were naturally not as surprised as the outer sect disciples. They were taken aback for a moment, but did not lose their composure. However, Jiang Li, who was carrying the dragon tortoise, also became the focus of attention. Many senior brothers and sisters immediately recognized him, and they waved their hands and greeted him from afar. "Junior brother Jiang Li, what's that thing you're dragging? Is it still alive?" "Dragon tortoise, this looks like a dragon tortoise. Did the head elder capture it?" "I heard that the dragon tortoise has the bloodline of the dragon race and is extremely powerful. Junior brother, you have to be careful not to be injured by it." A group of people surrounded the dragon tortoise, but none of them thought that this thing was captured by Jiang Li himself. Although Jiang Li was powerful in their hearts, he was still in the Qi refinement realm. Even Foundation establishment cultivators would not have an easy time against such a huge dragon tortoise. They naturally did not expect Jiang Li to capture it alive. Jiang Li did not try to explain, but only spoke a few words with them. After watching for a long time, someone finally asked about him. "Junior brother Jiang Li, I heard you participated in the demon extermination mission earlier. How was it? Was it dangerous?" "Junior brother Jiang Li, did you also return to the sect to participate in the martial arts competition?" "In my opinion, with junior brother's strength, you will definitely be able to obtain a good ranking in the martial arts competition. You will definitely be ranked first in the Qi refinement realm. When the time comes, let others see how powerful our Demon Vanquishing Hall is." The martial arts competition, this time, was divided into 2 parts: the Qi refinement realm below 20 years old and the Foundation establishment realm below 30 years old. Ignoring everything else, Jiang Li was definitely an invincible existence among the Qi refinement realm. The disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall were very certain of this because Jiang Li's iron fists had made them suffer greatly not long ago. Now, the pair of fists were about to show their might to the outside world, making them feel excited. The only thing Jiang Li had to worry about was that he should not use too much strength, lest he beat someone to death. If an ordinary Qi refinement realm cultivator received a punch from him, they would probably lose even if they had 10 lives. As he chatted with his fellow disciples, Jiang Li noticed a familiar figure in the distance. It was a towering figure, and a bald head covered in tattoos. He took a closer look and was immediately overjoyed. Wasn't that the head elder of the Demon Vanquishing Hall, his beloved master, Elder He? Wind arose beneath Jiang Li's feet as he carried the dragon tortoise's corpse and ran towards Elder He. After such a long period of running through the jungle's obstructions, his movement technique was already different from before, and his grasp of the armored horse divine travel had also risen to a new level. He dragged the dragon tortoise like a train and quickly arrived in front of Elder He. He threw it to the side and cupped his hands to greet the other party. "Master, you're back." After all, the Demon Vanquishing Hall was the main combat force of the Scripture Storage Valley. Apart from the Heaven and Earth Hall, where the Valley Masters faction was located, which took away most of the genius disciples, very few people could suppress the Demon Vanquishing Hall. Right now, it was the critical moment of the sect martial competition, and they had to select talents. The Demon Vanquishing Hall was an extremely important force, so Elder He naturally had to return to preside over the situation. "Yes, I heard from Mulan that you went to hunt demon beasts yourself," Elder He nodded. Then he looked at the dragon tortoise that still had some faint aura on the ground, doing his best to appear calm. However, Jiang Li clearly saw the corners of the other party's mouth twitching slightly. What strength did such a huge dragon tortoise have? How long had it been since he took Jiang Li in? He was actually able to hunt such a thing already. Elder He's inner thoughts were abnormally interesting. What kind of disciple did he take in? Disciples' skills are not good enough. The beast blood tattoo on my body disappeared too quickly. I can only temporarily pause the extermination mission and go out to hunt demon beasts. Afterwards, I momentarily forgot the direction and walked further and further away. When I succeeded in hunting, I did not expect that I would already be this close to the sect, so I directly returned. Jiang Li had told senior sister Liu Mulan at that time. However, he was searching for demon beasts near the gathering point. Now that he had crossed such a distance to return to the sect, he felt that he still needed to explain things. Elder He naturally did not believe his words. The distance between the Scripture Storage Valley and the temporary gathering point of the Demon Vanquishing Hall was huge. Even if an ordinary Qi refinement realm cultivator flew in a straight line, it would take them around a month. Jiang Li could not be assessed as an ordinary Qi refinement realm cultivator, but he could not possibly get lost and wander off to this extent. However, Elder He did not ask further. Earlier, Jiang Li returned by sprinting while carrying the dragon tortoise. He saw the improvement in Jiang Li's movement technique with his own eyes, so he had already guessed the reason why this kid wanted to run such a distance by himself. While hunting for beast blood materials, he was also training to make up for his shortcomings. It's your own ability to be able to return to the sect alone. "Is this the demon beast you caught? Where did you find this dragon tortoise?" Elder He asked. Dragon tortoises were quite rare in the Great Mountain. Because of its dragon bloodline, it could be said that the entire body was a treasure. This dragon tortoise was clearly underage, so there would definitely be a male and female dragon tortoise living nearby. Capturing them to make soup was not a bad choice. Chapter 122, Medicine Garden Mystic Realm. Jiang Li was stunned. That lake still had the yin zombie blood that he had poured. The only time in the past 100 years that the yin corpse blood had appeared on a large scale was in the Mother River. If Elder He saw this, then the coffin, the underwater fish, and even the corpses of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak sword cultivators would be traced. He thought for a moment, then took out a map and decisively pointed at a water area in the other direction. Elder He nodded and did not doubt him. He brought Jiang Li back to the quiet room that was specially used to cultivate the beast blood diagram. The water vapor in the quiet room had not completely dissipated. Clearly, someone had used it not long ago. It seemed that the senior brothers and sisters who he had never seen had also returned because of the sect martial arts competition. From the back of the quiet room, Elder He brought over a large vat that was several times larger and let Jiang Li boil the fire and medicine himself. Elder He stood at the side and helped Jiang Li deal with the dragon tortoise. This dragon tortoise possessed dragon blood, so every drop of blood essence on it was abnormally precious. With Jiang Li's technique, he would probably waste 70% of the blood essence. Furthermore, this dragon tortoise was still alive. The effects of the blood essence were even better. If Jiang Li was lucky, he might really be able to obtain a trace of dragon blood. To all body cultivators, it was something that they dreamed of. Jiang Li would fan it towards the bottom of the huge vat every 2 breaths of time. It was not a difficult task. He went to Elder He's side and observed the other party's method of killing the dragon tortoise to extract its blood. He also asked about that mystic realm. It was impossible for Jiang Li not to be curious about the mystic realm that caused the entire cultivation world of the Great Mountain region to be shaken. Elder He was currently cutting the tortoise shell. His hands were as steady as a machine. There was no need to hide this from Jiang Li, so he spoke about it in passing. It could be considered to have given him a deeper understanding of the mystic realm's appearance. According to Elder He, that mystic realm was a huge spiritual plant medicine garden. At first, it was two lucky rogue cultivators who discovered it by accident. The two rogue cultivators did not know how to refine pills and medicine. After picking more than 50 kilograms of spiritual materials in the mystic realm, they went to the Immortal Ascension Pavilion to sell them. In the end, when the Immortal Ascension Pavilion's deacon saw that the two of them did not understand the value, he wanted to scam them and offer a very low price. However, the two rogue cultivators were also shrewd. They discovered that something was wrong with his words. The two of them realized that they had been cheated and immediately became angry. They did not let up and shouted. Seeing that something was amiss, the deacon wanted to raise the price again, but they were also unwilling. Both sides argued in the Immortal Ascension Pavilion. As a result, the Immortal Ascension Pavilion's market was the best in the Great Mountain region. All the major sects had people stationed there to guard and exchange information. As a result, this argument attracted many cultivators who were watching the commotion. As cultivators who stayed in the cultivation bazaar all year round, how could they possibly be stupid? Soon, someone discovered that the technique of plucking those spiritual materials was terrible. The person who plucked them did not seem like he could grow them. However, it was very abnormal for the two of them to be able to gather over 50 kilograms of spiritual materials. Soon, someone discovered that something was wrong from the roots of those herbs. The residual soil at the spiritual material's root was exactly the same. This meant that the 50 kilograms of spiritual materials had been harvested in a very small area. However, this was not 100 kilograms of weed, but 100 kilograms of spiritual medicine. Generally speaking, for a spiritual plant master to search a mountain and find 1 or 2 kilograms of spiritual materials was already not bad. However, if these 50 kilograms of spiritual materials were not stolen from some sect's spiritual plant garden, then this would be a big matter. This time, the two rogue cultivators realized that something was wrong. Why did the surrounding cultivators not speak up for them and even stare at them? When they carried the spirit materials and wanted to leave, it was already too late. At that time, almost all of the reputable sects in the Great Mountain region were present. They represented more than half of the cultivation world of the Great Mountain region. Under their combined pressure, very few people could say no to them. After the two rogue cultivators revealed the mystic realm under pressure, almost everyone knew about this secret. Coupled with the location of the medicinal garden mystic realm being not within the territory of any of the four major sects, there was a huge conflict that arose later. As for the other small sects, if they dared to claim that the mystic realm was their property, it was probably not an opportunity to rise up, but the beginning of their destruction. Subsequently, this news was sent back to various sects immediately. The reputable factions in the Great Mountain sent out their people to take a share of the loot. In the beginning, they really did not pay much attention to it. After all, no one could say for sure how valuable news like this, which was obtained without effort, was. It was not until they arrived at the mysterious mystic realm that they realized that the value of it was far above their imagination. The spiritual materials and resources inside were so abundant that if one stepped on a random grass or plucked a random flower, they could likely be spiritual plants. In terms of spirit stones, it was a huge number that could practically cause a heart attack. In each sect, there were dozens of alchemists and spiritual plant masters who had entered the mystic realm. After that, they unanimously believed that the value of the medicine garden mystic realm would definitely surpass 5 complete spirit stone mines. One had to know that there were only 5 spirit stone mines in the entire cultivation world of the Great Mountain region. A single medicinal garden was equivalent to the total amount of known spirit stones in the entire Great Mountain region. In the beginning, some people also thought of mining forcefully. They wanted to obtain the immediate benefits first. However, that person was immediately scolded by all the spiritual plant masters present. Although temporary benefits were straightforward, it was no different from killing the chicken for the eggs and draining the pond to catch fish. One had to know that spiritual materials could grow after every harvest. If that medicinal garden was properly managed, it would continuously produce large amounts of spiritual materials every year. That was something that could benefit the future generations for 1,000 years. It could even change the current state of the cultivation world of the Great Mountain region. The various large sects were not short-sighted people. Only rogue cultivators and demonic cultivators without roots sought temporary benefits. Large sects had a history of tens of thousands of years. On the contrary, they looked down on that little bit of profit and preferred to manage their gains. Those rogue cultivators who only found out later also swarmed over. After they gathered together, they declared that since this mystic realm was unowned, all cultivators in the cultivation world of the Great Mountain region were qualified to reap benefits from it. This caused them to create quite a commotion, just like when the Scripture Storage Valley was established. At that time, the sects were short-handed. Due to their numbers, they really divided a small area and let the rogue cultivators search and guard it. With this, the short-sightedness of the rogue cultivators was exposed. The rogue cultivators who had obtained admission tickets no longer cared about exploring or guarding. They were like a swarm of locusts as they started to gnaw on the land. Although they were discovered by the sect forces in just a few hours and jointly expelled, the destruction they caused already made many cultivators' morale plummet. Then, more and more sect cultivators arrived and suppressed the chaotic rogue cultivators. They even issued joint warrants against the few rogue cultivators leading the group, turning them into fiendish cultivators that everyone wanted to beat up. As the head elder of the Demon Vanquishing Hall, it was also after the incident that elder he went over personally. The sects learned from their mistakes. No one was willing to let rogue cultivators in anymore. Moreover, there was nobody who wanted to see further destruction of the precious mystic realm. What followed was a lengthy wrangling. The 4 great sects naturally wanted to divide it among themselves, but because the cake was too big and the temptation was too great, the other sects naturally would not agree. When small sects worked together to speak, even the 4 major sects could not ignore them. Therefore, in the end, they still followed the old rules. In the cultivation world, the words of the strongest were most effective. Of course, this was not referring to an all-out war, but the Great Mountain region's cultivator competition. Those small sects knew that their higher-ups were far inferior to the 4 great sects. Thus, they planned to use the new generation of disciples with even more uncertainty to try to turn things around. After all, if those small sects gathered most of their resources to support a few genius disciples, the resources that those disciples obtained would not be inferior to those of large sects. This was the reason why they were so confident. As for the 4 major sects, they did not think that their disciples would be worse than others. Therefore, the candidates for the competition were decided on 2 categories: Qi Refinement Realm disciples under the age of 20 and Foundation Establishment disciples under the age of 30. At this point, the rules of the Great Mountain Cultivation World's competition were slowly finalized. Chapter 123, Dragon Tortoise Blood Tattoo. After Jiang Li heard the entire story, he pondered for a moment before asking in a very ignorant manner, "If we win the competition, the rewards will be very generous, right?" Elder He was at a loss for words. This disciple of his was probably living a life of poverty. Why was he always thinking about such things? However, without a doubt, regardless of whether it was the sect martial competition or the Great Mountain Cultivator competition, the winner would definitely receive rich rewards. Soon, the medicinal liquid in the large vat began to boil. Elder He began to pour the dragon tortoise blood into the large vat. Unlike the previous heart, Elder He planned to use the dragon tortoise's blood this time, all of it. This was also the reason why the medicinal cauldron was several times larger than before. However, Jiang Li was not a giant. With his small size, he would definitely be unable to absorb all of the dragon tortoise blood. It would be difficult for him to even absorb 1/10 of it. Therefore, before condensing the blood tattoo, they still had to take complicated steps to refine the concentrated tortoise blood. However, more than 10 minutes later, "Aren't you a registered disciple of the Alchemy Hall? Why are you so clumsy?" Jiang Li, who was assisting from the side, was despised by Elder He. Elder He knew that Jiang Li had the status of a registered disciple of the Alchemy Hall, so he naturally thought that Jiang Li had talent in alchemy and had a certain foundation. However, in the end, he kept making mistakes while only refining the essence blood. This made Elder He quite upset. If Jiang Li screwed up some important parts, this precious dragon tortoise would be wasted. Forget it, don't cause trouble anymore. Go to the Alchemy Hall and find a disciple to help out. Jiang Li smiled awkwardly and did not explain the origins of his registered disciple identity. After leaving the quiet room, Jiang Li directly went to the Alchemy Hall. In the disciples' alchemy area, he found an especially neat alchemy room. Senior Sister Little 4, long time no see. There was only one person Jiang Li knew in the Alchemy Hall, and that was Senior Sister Little 4, who was like a rabbit and usually bounced around when she walked. Senior Sister Little 4's pill chamber was neatly arranged. From the ground to the roof beams, there was not a speck of dust. Clearly, this pill chamber had a very diligent master. Little 4, who was rolling up her sleeves and grinding the blue shell pearls, looked up. She was stunned for a moment when she saw Jiang Li, then her face lit up in joy. She put down the chores in her hand and bounced to Jiang Li's side, sizing up his inner sect disciple uniform. Not bad, not bad. You look much better in this outfit. But you've been in the inner sect for so long and haven't come to see me at all. Have you forgotten about your senior sister Little 4? She tried her best to look like a senior sister. With one hand on her waist, she patted Jiang Li on the shoulder. However, ever since Jiang Li started cultivating his body under the effects of various buffs, his height practically changed every day. Now, he was already an entire head taller than senior sister Little 4. Therefore, the way Little 4 raised her hand to pat Jiang Li's shoulder did not look right. Instead, it looked a little lively and cute. Yes, yes, yes. It's all my fault. How could I not come to see the most beautiful senior sister Little 4 as soon as I entered the inner sect? Jiang Li hurriedly smiled and apologized, and he praised Little 4 to the point her face turned red. He casually grabbed the grinding bowl that the other party had placed on the table previously. As he stirred the grinding stick, he stated his purpose for coming this time. Little 4 put on an as-expected expression. She knew that Jiang Li would never visit unless he needed something. He definitely had something to ask her for help with. However, she still readily agreed and patted her chest, saying that she would take care of it. After saying these few words, the pearls in the grinding bowl had completely turned to dust. Little 4 covered the spiritual materials that were currently being handled in the pill chamber with a white cloth, before returning to the demon vanquishing hall with Jiang Li to help Elder He refine the tortoise blood. There was a huge difference between a professional and an unprofessional. Little 4 came over, took a few glances and asked a few questions before rolling up her sleeves and starting to work. Her movements were practiced and precise without any mistakes. To alchemists who were refining and cooking pills daily, brewing soup was child's play. A large amount of dragon tortoise blood was added into the vat. A thick stench of blood quickly filled the air. As the blood soup bubbled, a layer of yellow-brown foam floated on the surface of the blood soup. At that time, the oil and poison in the blood were slowly separated from the blood, due to the effects of the spirit fire and medicinal herbs. Then Jiang Li grabbed senior sister Little Four's calf, carrying her high up into the air, standing next to the boiling large vat. In her hands, she held a large iron spoon, removing the foam. As for why he did not use the wooden ladder a few steps away and instead used his hands to hug her, don't ask. He was just training his body. This process of separating the impurities was very cumbersome and long. The blood soup in the huge vat was boiled for an entire day and night until it became as sticky as magma. Only then did it basically meet the requirements. In the end, after some processing, Jiang Li began to skillfully remove his clothes, and then he jumped into the large vat. He concentrated on circulating the beast blood diagram. Rich blood qi instantly penetrated his body. He was already very familiar with these operations. Within his consciousness, the huge dragon tortoise appeared in the form of blood-colored mist again. It roared at the culprit who killed it, Jiang Li. The dragon tortoise's aura was extremely strong. After all, its rank was higher than Jiang Li's. Although Jiang Li was only dealing with the ferocity of the dragon tortoise's blood, it was still very easy for him to suffer a loss if he was not careful. Therefore, compared to usual times, he needed to make more preparations to increase the success rate. First of all, when faced with the murderer Jiang Li, the blood-colored dragon tortoise was naturally inferior. Furthermore, in the Sea of Consciousness, there was not only one person standing opposite the blood-colored dragon tortoise. Far away on the fire mountain of the Shu Mountain Five Elements Peak, the sword cultivator clone seemed to be meditating in his room. However, everything had already stopped. Apart from Jiang Li's consciousness, a smaller version of the parallel mind with the sword on its back, and the smaller version of the ghost, who was only half the height of a human, stood on both sides of him. After the parallel mind obtained the partial memories and experiences of the sword cultivator, Tang Yan, he had already grown a lot. He was no longer as small as a palm when he first split up. When he appeared in Jiang Li's consciousness, he was already not much inferior to his main body. If this parallel was recalled in the future, the comprehension obtained would probably raise his enlightenment and mind attributes by a huge number. And although the ghost was weak, if it had a powerful master behind it, it would immediately commit all sorts of crimes. This was especially true for the Sea of Consciousness, which was where the ghost was most powerful. Even Jiang Li had nearly fallen for its trick back then, so it was obvious that it had some redeeming qualities. This dragon tortoise was quite pitiful. When it was alive, it met a hooligan. Even after death, it still had to suffer such an unfair treatment in Jiang Li's consciousness. The dragon tortoise was in a disadvantageous situation of fighting against 2.5 enemies. Roar! The blood-colored dragon tortoise roared. It swayed its thick and long snake tail and pounced towards Jiang Li. However, what greeted it was a dazzling sword light. In the next moment, his world was filled with a miserable cry. The entire dragon tortoise was split into two halves by the sword light. The parallel mind was the first to attack. The flying sword, burning rainbow, did not have a sword spirit, so it naturally could not enter the consciousness space to help. The sword of light behind the clone was the materialization of his sword heart talent. Sword cultivators placed great emphasis on the cultivation of their mental state. The sword heart that was carried on their backs in the consciousness space was the nemesis of all mental demons and evil thoughts. If not for the fact that his parallel mind could only use the sword heart once a day, this thing would be a divine artifact in his spiritual world. The blood-colored dragon tortoise was not corporeal after all and would not be killed by this strike. However, after the blood-colored fog gathered and recovered, its size was reduced by half. Apart from the effect of sword heart, something seized the opportunity to seize control of a small part of the blood fog. Behind the blood-colored dragon tortoise, another Jiang Li formed from blood-colored fog appeared. This was the ability of the ghost. After that, all three Jiang Li violently beat up the blood-colored dragon tortoise. In the outside world, An entire 6 hours passed before Jiang Li finally erased the last bit of blood mist. He opened his eyes in a slightly exhausted manner. Beast Blood Diagram has successfully recorded a beast's blood. Added status: Dragon Tortoise Blood Tattoo. Dragon Tortoise Blood Tattoo. Strength +9, Constitution +10, Speed +7, Physique will improve more quickly, Cell aging decreased by 80%, Production of Dragon Blood, 0.01 drops per day. Duration, 90 days minus plus. Had he finally succeeded? Jiang Li rubbed his brows and looked at the status that had just appeared impatiently. This dragon tortoise was indeed worthy of being a dragon tortoise. The blood tattoo condensed by it alone brought about the basic attributes enhancement, which was more than twice that of the previous few demon beasts. In addition to the standard physical enhancement, it also had 2 additional attributes. Cell aging decreased by 80% and production of dragon blood, 0.01 drops per day. The former was naturally the characteristics of a 10,000-year-old tortoise. This effect was actually pointless for these expendable blood tattoos, let alone slowing down his cell aging by 80%. So what if it was delayed by 100%? At most, the tattoo would only last a few months. The effect could not even be felt. However, to Jiang Li, his lifespan seemed to have increased by 5 times just from calculating with his fingers. The last condition of producing dragon blood made him even happier. Initially, Elder He had only wanted to try his luck. He did not expect that he would really succeed. Fortunately, Jiang Li did not dissect the dragon tortoise himself, and instead brought it back to the sect. From the information in the status bar, it could produce 0.01 drops per day for a duration of 90 days. Such a huge dragon tortoise could not even provide him a complete drop of dragon blood under normal circumstances. If he foolishly took out the heart and brought it back, then the effect of producing dragon blood would definitely have nothing to do with him. Although he could only obtain a drop of dragon blood after 100 days, he still had a long life ahead. As long as he waited, he could accumulate quite an amount over time. Chapter 124, Beginning of the Martial Competition. Don't touch him. When he saw that Jiang Li was about to get up and come out, Little Four, who had been blushing for some reason, went up to help him, but she was hurriedly stopped by Elder He. Senior sister Little Four retreated in confusion. In the next second, the huge vat shattered under Jiang Li's uncontrollable force. Jiang Li was also stunned. He was still holding onto a piece of the jar. He also felt that something was amiss and took a step forward. Bang! The limestone floor beneath his feet was directly shattered by his stomp. In just 2 moves, this quiet room was completely ruined by him. Jiang Li only felt the muscles in his entire body swell up as his strength rose greatly. However, following that, he lost control of his body's strength. Although it was not as exaggerated as the full power of the armored horse Divine Travel, the power unleashed by any of his movements was enough to destroy the stone floor. Master, I'm going out to dig holes. Senior sister Little Four, thank you so much this time. It's a little inconvenient for me now. I'll definitely pay you a visit someday. Under Elder He's murderous gaze, Jiang Li did not dare to move recklessly. After exchanging greetings with senior sister Little Four, he reached out and summoned the dragon imprisoning lock that he had set aside, allowing it to bring him towards the open space outside. Soon, an exaggerated rumble sounded from the empty space. If not for the fact that Jiang Li had already carved a circle of sound absorption runes around this place, the entire demon vanquishing hall would not be able to sleep for a long time under his continuous pounding. This lasted for another 7 days and 7 nights. During this period of time, the registration for the sect competition would begin. It was naturally impossible for Elder He to deny Jiang Li's participation. It should be said that he had been waiting for this opportunity to show off for a long time. He could not help but feel excited when he thought about how the young disciple he had just taken in for a few months would beat up a group of geniuses. Therefore, before Jiang Li could say anything, Elder He had already signed up for him. During this time, Yan Hong sent him another bag of golden powder and golden paint, finally covering his entire body with the anti-demon golden skin. Of course, this also meant that he would no longer have any affinity with beautiful female ghosts. Yan Hong had finally stepped into the mid-stage Qi refinement realm too. As Jiang Li gradually gained a foothold in the sect, his business also improved. Apart from giving Jiang Li a portion of the dividends every month and the expenditures he used for his own cultivation, he could even give some spirit stones to his lackey disciples as bonuses. According to him, he planned to set up a stall and send people to the Immortal Ascension Pavilion's bazaar. At that time, he would be able to earn more than 10 times the amount of spirit stones. After that, Jiang Li once again visited senior sister Little Four's alchemy chamber. Unfortunately, the few bottles of good wine that he brought with him did not come in handy. Instead, she dragged him to deal with a large pile of spiritual materials that needed to be processed with great effort. After that, Elder He's disciples, Liu Mulan, and a few other disciples who met the requirements for the competition also rushed back to the sect. Jiang Li had seen all of them before. All of them were super fierce men with tattoos on their bodies. Although Jiang Li was strong enough, he was still young. When he stood beside them, it was as if a potato had mixed into a group of pumpkins. They treated this junior brother of theirs, Jiang Li, pretty well. Basically, every single one of them had the intention to give him a gift, and it even allowed Jiang Li to surprisingly make a small profit. Time passed day by day, and it was getting closer and closer to the time of the sect martial arts competition. On the ground below the floating main arena, another 10 small arenas appeared. At that time, the floating platform would be the stage for Foundation Establishment disciples. This was because if Foundation Establishment disciples used their full strength to cast spell techniques, the damage range would be very difficult to grasp, and it was very likely that they would accidentally injure the audience. As for the weaker Qi Refinement Realm disciples, they would fight in the arena. Of course, if both sides' disciples wanted to fight in the air, this arena could also be used. Soon, it was the day of the sect martial arts competition. The Valley Master of the Scripture Storage Valley and many of the higher-ups gathered in the long, clear hall. After that, the entire hall soared into the sky and landed on a cloud, exuding an immortal aura. From that height, the field of vision would definitely be perfect. All 11 arenas could be seen clearly. The inner sect disciples could choose to board the sect's flying ship and stand on the deck to watch the large and small arena in the center. As for the outer sect disciples, they did not receive such good treatment. The 10 Qi Refinement Realm disciples' rings on the ground were not bad. If they wanted to see the exciting battle between the Foundation Establishment Realm senior brothers, they could only look up. Following that, a sect elder came out to announce the rules of the competition. There were no rules actually. One could use artifacts, talismans, and even swallow pills on the spot. This was the rule set by the Great Mountain Cultivator competition. As long as one could win, all other trivial matters were nothing. Of course, killing was not allowed in the sect. Jiang Li, are you really going to fight in this ring? I heard that only 2 of the Qi Refinement Realm disciples who are participating in this martial competition are at the mid-stage Qi Refinement Realm. The other senior brothers and sisters are all at the late-stage Qi Refinement Realm. Is it really fine for you to go up like this? Yan Hong stood beside Jiang Li and chattered non-stop. In his eyes, or in the eyes of most cultivators at his level, the Qi Refinement Cultivation Realm represented everything. Have you forgotten that I was able to capture that dragon tortoise last time? What can a few Qi Refinement disciples do against me? Yan Hong was in the trading area at that time and did not see the true body of the dragon tortoise. Later on, when he heard people talk about it, he only thought that it was exaggerated. In his mind, there was a deeply rooted view. A mid-stage Qi Refinement cultivator could never defeat a late-stage Qi Refinement cultivator. It was nothing much, he was just ignorant. Moreover, it's just the late-stage qi refinement realm. I'm almost there. Jiang Li rolled his eyes helplessly, and then he muttered to himself. It had been more than 2 months since he had broken through to the 6th level of the ghost wood art. He had spent a long period of time cultivating his movement technique, so he did not have much time to cultivate his qi refinement cultivation method. However, the effect of spiritual qi infusion was indeed powerful, causing him to already be at the peak of the 6th level. He was only a step away from breaking through to the late-stage qi refinement realm. Right, you said that other than me, there is another mid-stage qi refinement realm disciple who is participating in the martial competition. Do you know who it is? Jiang Li became curious about this. Besides him, who else was so brave? Look over there, isn't that the one? Yan Hong quietly pointed in a direction. Jiang Li looked over and discovered that in a corner of the waiting area sat a youth who was similar to them in age. The expression between his brows was indifferent, as if he was arrogant to the point of disdaining all life in the world. However, Jiang Li suddenly felt that this posturing expression was a little familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. Chapter 125, As You Wish. He is. Jiang Li thought for a long time but still could not figure out who the other party was, so he asked Yan Hong beside him. He's Xianxia, a disciple of our batch. It's just that he's a genius with a top-grade spiritual root. He became an inner sect disciple as soon as he joined the sect and even entered the Heaven and Earth Hall. He's very impressive. Yan Hong often mingled in the trading area with a lot of people and was well informed. In order to do business that could earn money, he naturally could not lack information in all aspects. Therefore, unlike Jiang Li, who was always occupied by various cultivation plans, Yan Hong had already become a know-it-all in the past half a year after he entered the sect. However, when Yan Hong spoke of him, his tone was sour and slightly mocking. Xianxia, I seem to have heard this name before, but if he's from the Heaven and Earth Hall, could he be a disciple of the Valley Master? Jiang Li was so familiar with Yan Hong, so he naturally understood what he meant. They were both at the mid-stage qi refinement realm, so what was there to be arrogant about? After Yan Hong's repeated reminders, Jiang Li recalled that he had indeed seen this person when he had first boarded the sect's flying ship. However, at that time, the other party had only put on that arrogant expression because he looked down on outer sect disciples like them. He did not expect that he would treat everyone, including these inner sect senior brothers, like this. No, he's the disciple of another elder of the Heaven and Earth Hall. Yan Hong's words were very calm, but his expression clearly said that he was not worthy. It seemed that the EQ of that genius of the same batch was quite low. From the situation of Xianxia sitting at a table alone, there were not many inner sect disciples who were willing to bear with him. This was especially true when compared to his senior brother, Chu Yongxuan. In comparison, he appeared even more ignorant. The eldest senior brother was so strong and yet still so humble. Wasn't this guy's spiritual root just a bit better? Who was he to put on a long face every day? Jiang Li nodded and did not say anything. He only thought that perhaps he and the other party would be placed together in the upcoming sect competition. The two of them were at the mid-stage qi refinement realm, so it was likely to happen. He shook his head, finding it funny. He casually took out 2 black pills from a small porcelain bottle and stuffed them into his mouth to chew. A sweet taste of the sea lark fruit slowly filled his mouth. Senior sister Little Four was indeed as she had said. She was a true alchemy genius. This was the 100 flavors pill that she had invented herself. This thing could refine various food dishes into pills, almost perfectly retaining the flavor and nutrition within. He could bring it along with him. Although it was not considered a medicinal pill and did not have any special effects, this thing was delicious. Out of the tens of thousands of kilograms of meat scraped off the dragon tortoise's body, other than having a barbecue party with the fellow disciples of the demon vanquishing hall, the remaining few hundred kilograms were also made into 100 flavors pills by Little Four. Jiang Li, Yan Hong, and a few disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall gathered at a table. After sharing a few hundred flavors pills as snacks, the martial arts competition finally officially began. There were a total of 272 Qi Refinement Realm disciples participating in the sect competition this time, and a total of 43 Foundation Establishment Realm disciples. Under the condition of age restrictions, to still have so many disciples registering showed that the Scripture Storage Valley's inner sect was indeed second to none in the Great Mountain region. There were only 10 grounded arenas. Just for this first round alone, each ring had to accommodate 13 to 14 rounds. There was no need to mention the floating battle arena above. If 2 people fought at once, it would still take 21 rounds to complete. He estimated that the first round of the martial competition would take at least 2 days to end. On this side, female cultivators from the Rejuvenation Hall who did not participate in the martial arts competition acted as staff members. Soon, all the disciples who participated in the martial arts competition received a bamboo stick with a name and number engraved on it. Jiang Li, number 271. When Jiang Li received the bamboo skewer, black lines could not help but appear on his forehead. He looked at Xianxia, who was sitting not far away. The other party's expression was no different from his. He had clearly got number 272. Jiang Li was speechless. The other 270 disciples were clearly all at the late-stage Qi refinement realm. What was the point of arranging them according to cultivation level? He pursed his lips helplessly. However, this number was not completely useless. The only thing that made Jiang Li feel gratified was that the order of the battles on stage was completely opposite to the number on the bamboo stick. In other words, he could go on stage to finish the battle in the first round. He did not need to wait 2 days like his senior brothers who had drawn a single-digit lot. Under the guidance of the disciples of the Rejuvenation Hall, the disciples between 253 and 272 entered the ring according to their number. Jiang Li and Xianxia happened to be the first ring with the letter A. 2 mid-stage Qi refinement realm disciples could be considered the 2 oddities of the martial arts competition. Although their cultivation levels were low, they attracted the attention of many people below the stage. Especially the tens of thousands of outer sect disciples who were clearly not involved in the sect martial arts competition. They were the most excited. The disciples below the stage started to discuss animatedly. Many disciples who knew Jiang Li and the other party's identities even started to speak with assurance and analyze the outcome of the battle between the two. Jiang Li had only been an outer sect disciple a few months ago. In fact, many disciples had even come to greet him after he had been promoted to the inner sect. Logically speaking, they were naturally more inclined to hope that Jiang Li would win. Moreover, Jiang Li had seized the only victory in this year's outer sect grand competition as a new disciple, and he carried some legendary story that others took delight in talking about. There were many people who supported him to win. As for Xianxia, who was an inner sect disciple as soon as he entered the sect, not many people knew him. However, a top-grade spiritual root was enough to make most of the outer sect disciples gasp in jealousy. According to incomplete statistics, every year, for 5 nights out of the first 10 days on average, an outer sect disciple who had just entered the Scripture Storage Valley would dream that they had a top-grade spiritual root. The other 5 nights were spent enviously thinking about this. Under such circumstances, top-grade spiritual roots were naturally deified in the outer sect. Even if they had not even met Xianxia before, his spiritual root talent was enough to let them classify him as an invincible opponent. The onlookers below were in a heated argument, but the 2 people on the stage appeared very calm. Jiang Li was still chewing on the candy in his mouth, while Xianxia was still hugging his sword. Dong! It was not until the referee beside the ring sounded the gong that they finally looked at each other. Heaven and Earth Hall, Xianxia. Demon Vanquishing Hall, Jiang Li. The 2 of them first politely reported their names. Jiang Li had a smile on his face and wanted to say a few polite words between fellow disciples. However, before he could say it, Xianxia spoke arrogantly. "You attack first, otherwise you won't have the chance anymore." Jiang Li was stunned, and he politely lowered his cupped fists. Jiang Li almost laughed when he heard this. Did this fellow really think he was invincible? "Then as you wish." A breeze blew past. Xianxia, who was still immersed in his powerful strength, suddenly opened his eyes wide. A drop of cold sweat involuntarily rolled down his forehead. This was because Jiang Li, who was standing in front of him earlier, had already vanished, and the words "as you wish" sounded out from behind him. Bang! Jiang Li kicked his opponent's butt from behind. To be honest, Jiang Li felt that Xianxia was indeed the most troublesome among the 271 Qi refinement disciples. Because he was only at the mid-stage Qi refinement realm, Jiang Li had to restrain his strength very much in order to avoid accidentally killing him. Amidst the crisp sound of bones breaking, Xianxia's hip was violently deformed. His tailbone and pelvis were instantly deformed and broken under the collision of the huge force. The insufferably arrogant Xianxia, who was holding a longsword in his hand, instantly fell to the ground. Moreover, his momentum did not stop as he slid forward quickly in a pathetic posture. The clothes tore apart as they slid, leaving a large amount of blood stains on the reinforced arena. It was not until he slid to the edge of the ring and half of Xianxia's body was already hanging outside that he finally stopped and was not directly eliminated. However, judging from his deformed lower body, he clearly could not stand up. "Senior sister, I think we can announce the results." Jiang Li felt that he had already used very little strength. He even attacked the lower body with the thickest soft tissue and the least possibility of injuring him permanently. However, he did not expect that he would still kick the other party to this extent. However, there were countless spirit pills and wondrous techniques in the cultivation world. If treated properly, it should not leave any repercussions of urinary incontinence on the other party. The female cultivator from the rejuvenation hall nodded. She also knew Jiang Li, the young arena master of the demon vanquishing hall, and was not surprised by this result. She was also prepared to announce the results early and then rescue the injured, just as she often did. Battle Arena A, first match winner. At this moment, clang! A flying sword flew out of Xianxia's body and tore through the air towards Jiang Li. It seemed that he was still unwilling to admit defeat. He gritted his teeth and endured the pain. He pointed his right hand that was covered in blood like a sword and aimed at Jiang Li from afar. He moved the flying sword to pierce the opponent's heart. In terms of sword cultivators, the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak was naturally the most powerful. However, it was not that other cultivators did not use flying swords or sword-type treasures. On the contrary, in the region of the Great Mountain, the frequency at which cultivators used sword-type artifacts was quite high. It was just that they were not as strong as the Shu Mountain sword cultivators. Ding! When faced with the flying sword that shot over, Jiang Li casually stretched out his hand and pinched it as if he was crushing a tree branch, and he only used his index finger and thumb to crush the flying sword in his hand. The quality of this flying sword was not low. Although it could not compare to the Shu Mountain's flying sword, it was definitely of excellent quality. It should be a treasure bestowed by the other party's master. The sword is a good one, but it's such a pity to have it in your hands. Buzz tilde. The flying sword was pinched by Jiang Li and was still buzzing and vibrating non-stop. Xianxia's sword fingers, which were lying on the ground, almost started to bleed. He desperately urged the flying sword to try and break free from Jiang Li's fingers. Jiang Li glanced at him, and then he flicked his other finger towards the sword. The flying sword immediately shook violently and let out a sound before the dazzling flowing light on the sword instantly vanished. The spiritual qi in the flying sword was forcefully scattered, and it also suffered considerable damage. For a time, it sank into silence like a piece of scrap iron. No matter how Xianxia urged it, it no longer moved. How is this possible? What did you do to my flying sword? Move, move, hurry up and move. Jiang Li walked step by step to Xianxia's side. The other party glared at him with reddened eyes, and tears of unwillingness and injustice could even be seen in his eyes. He seemed to be blaming Jiang Li for not following his script as the main character. Is it my fault? Jiang Li shrugged indifferently, and then he kicked his opponent off the arena. Battle Arena A, first match. The winner is the Demon Vanquishing Hall's disciple, Jiang Li. Jiang Li casually tossed away the flying sword in his hand, as if it was trash, and he left the combat ring under the stunned gazes of the outer sect disciples. That flying sword was given by the other party's master. Since they were from the same sect, there was no need for him to be greedy over such a small gain. So powerful, did you see that? Jiang Li won. I saw it, but I think I was hallucinating. I think so too. Did senior brother Jiang Li grab the flying sword just now? Can someone tell me how a physical body can grab a flying sword? Moreover, senior brother Jiang Li seems to be able to teleport. He instantly arrived at the other side of the arena just now. How did he do that? A group of outer sect disciples chattered as they gathered together and discussed with one another. They tried to use their shallow knowledge to speculate exactly what kind of spell technique Jiang Li had used to achieve such an effect. Compared to the outer sect disciples watching the commotion, the inner sect disciples and sect elders saw through the act. Old he, what's up with your disciple? Is he really only in the mid-stage chi refinement realm? With that physique, how many demon beasts have you stuffed into his body? That's not right. Old he, you've only taken this disciple in for a few months, right? How has his cultivation level increased so quickly? Looking from his aura, he will probably reach the late stage in a few days. Did you feed him pills every day? On the floating, long, clear hall, a group of elders were attracted by the crushing battle on Jiang Li's side. Those disciples did not understand what happened, but as high-level cultivators, they were not blind. Jiang Li had run to Xianxia's back just now and kicked carefully. Then, he grabbed the flying sword and scattered the flying sword's spiritual chi. This series of actions did not expend any of his spiritual chi at all. It was a situation created by pure physical strength. This was extremely exaggerated, because just a few months ago, the weak Jiang Li had become Elder He's disciple before their eyes. Junior brother He, how many blood tattoos have Jiang Li already drawn? At this moment, the Valley Master of Scripture Storage Valley, Taoist Wuxia, asked. As expected of the Scripture Storage Valley Master, his perception was really extraordinary. He hit the nail on the head. Senior brother Wuxia, that kid is already at the 4th blood tattoo. Elder He replied, but the smile on his face could not be concealed no matter what. The 4th one, looks like it was the right choice to let you take in this disciple. If it was anyone else, his talent would probably be wasted. The beast blood diagram was one of the 4 strongest ancient inheritances in the Scripture Storage Valley. Its might was only inferior to the Tao technique of the Valley Master's lineage, square heaven seal. In a short period of time, Jiang Li had already drawn the 4th blood tattoo. This meant that he was extremely compatible with the beast blood diagram. The faster the beast blood tattoo disappeared, the faster the speed at which he absorbed the demon beast's power. This was an even more effective method than swallowing medicinal pills. Therefore, although Jiang Li's speed of improvement was still unbelievable, with this explanation, it was not so hard to accept. All the sect elders smiled sourly in their hearts, as they congratulated Elder He regarding the disciple he had taken in. Only Xianxia's master from the Heaven and Earth Hall had an ugly expression on his face. This disciple with a top-grade spiritual root had been taught by him for more than half a year. Yet, against the medium-grade spiritual root disciple, Jiang Li, that elder he took in for a few months, he lost terribly. This made him feel very embarrassed. Moreover, it was one thing for his disciple to lose like this, but his personality was also terrible. He had offended many people in the inner sect, and it really made him worry a lot. No one came to carry him away after lying on the ground for a long time. It could be seen how bad his social relationship was. This master of Xianxia had never thought of standing up for his disciple and finding trouble with Jiang Li. The other party's master was the head elder of the demon vanquishing hall. Why would an ordinary elder like him to do such a thing? Was he tired of living? Chapter 126, Square Heaven Seal, Earth Dust Scripture. Jiang Li's first battle ended just like that. This was something without any suspense to begin with, but this battle had exposed some problems. His power was still not under his control. In fact, this had already been proven when the demon vanquishing hall was fighting. At that time, he had been careless and often injured his fellow disciples. If not for the fact that the bodies of the demon vanquishing hall disciples were relatively sturdy, and because he was not so powerful back then, there would have been more severe injuries occurring. This control of strength was not only useful when holding back against weak enemies. This power was apparent in all aspects. It was just like how he was still unable to master the armored horse divine travel and could not even walk normally, so he had to use a negative status to suppress it. The power that he could not control was sometimes strengthened, but at other times it was also weakened. When Jiang Li's opponent was someone with ordinary strength like Xianxia and was far inferior to him, he would naturally crush and win. After that, he could even say arrogantly, "You fell before I even used any strength." However, when his opponent was on the same level as him or even stronger, this power might become a burden to him, making him unable to hit his opponent effectively. Apart from that, the most obvious drawback was that Jiang Li was no longer able to draw runes on the wood pieces. The fluctuating strength had a devastating effect on this meticulous operation. However, his method of slamming the ground was actually just to expend his strength. It was already very difficult to help him control his strength better now. He had to find a more effective training program. After some thought, Jiang Li first went to the nearby kitchen and brought out a basket of eggs. Then, he carried the eggs and flew to the ship where the demon vanquishing hall was located. Although this demon vanquishing hall had a few warships that could be used, it was still a sect event after all. It was clearly not appropriate to use a killing weapon like a warship to surround the venue. Junior brother Jiang Li, well done. Little junior brother is mighty. Did you guys see that? That disciple from the Heaven and Earth Hall was beaten to tears, haha. As soon as Jiang Li returned, he received enthusiastic greetings from his fellow disciples, causing Jiang Li to feel embarrassed for a long time. After all, he was only bullying a novice. How could he be called mighty? You flatter me. This is only the first round, it's nothing much. After Jiang Li said a few humble words, he began to watch the martial arts competition with everyone. Jiang Li ended quickly, but the first battle of the Foundation establishment disciples had yet to be determined. One of them was a disciple of the Law Enforcement Hall, while the other was a cultivator from the Weapon Refinement Hall. That disciple of the Law Enforcement Hall was still the same as before. He used a saber as a weapon, and he used a rather ruthless saber technique to slash out saber lights repeatedly, creating ravines on the arena with astonishing might. However, he was not the one with the advantage. In the arena, a fire gourd would spew out flames from time to time. There were 2 flying swords, 3 flying sabers, and 4 steel forks. They danced in the air and continuously attacked the disciple of the Law Enforcement Hall in the middle, causing him to have no choice but to desperately brandish the sabers in his hand and run for his life. This was the combat style of the cultivators of the Weapon Refinement Hall. They would use their magic artifacts to smash people to death. However, it was not completely impossible for the disciple of the Law Enforcement Hall to win. Apart from the extraordinary fire gourd, the other 9 artifacts that were flying in the air were of ordinary quality and could not form an overwhelming advantage. At the same time, controlling 10 magic artifacts had an extremely exaggerated pressure on a Foundation establishment cultivator. The current situation depended on whether that disciple from the law enforcement hall could withstand the pressure. If he could withstand it until the other party's spiritual chi was exhausted, there was a possibility of him turning the tables. However, if he could not withstand it, not long after, that black-clothed disciple of the law enforcement hall started to become more and more flustered. He completely fell into the opponent's rhythm and was quickly hit by the pillar of fire that was spat out by the gourd after making a mistake. He fell to the ground and was pinned by 4 steel forks that flew over quickly. He could not move at all and was defeated. The moment that disciple lost, the surrounding disciples immediately cheered. Obviously, they were not congratulating the victor of the weapon refinement hall, but purely feeling happy for the loss of the law enforcement hall disciple. The disciples of the law enforcement hall had no right to punish the inner sect disciples, and if they were arrogant in the inner sect, they would be easily beaten to death. However, among the many inner sect disciples, a large portion of them had also been promoted from the outer sect. They had more or less been oppressed by the law enforcement hall, so they naturally hated them. Even Jiang Li had been raided by them before he entered the inner sect. There was nothing special about the work in the law enforcement hall. However, people who thought that they were superior would definitely not be liked by anyone. Jiang Li thought hatefully that he should be a little more ruthless when he met the disciples of the law enforcement hall in the future. Then, he could not help but increase his strength a little, crushing the 2 eggs in his hand. He threw the broken eggs into the wooden barrel at the side, then took out 2 eggs from the basket, placed them in his palm, and gently rolled them around like walnuts. The basket of eggs that he had brought from the kitchen was naturally not for eating, nor was it used to smash the stage, but to train his uncontrollable brute strength. This method was taught by senior sister Liu Mulan. It was said that, as senior brothers and sisters, they had used it before. However, the speed at which their physique strengthened was far inferior to Jiang Li's. These shattered eggs could also be eaten by the spirit beasts domesticated by the sect after the matter was over. It would not cause too much waste. After a few more battles, Jiang Li had gained a lot of knowledge and had a rough understanding of the combat methods and strength of Foundation establishment cultivators. It had to be said that the Tao Foundation was really too important to cultivators. Apart from cultivators who cultivated body cultivation, the bodies of ordinary Qi refinement realm cultivators were actually not much different from that of mortals. When mortal swords and daggers slashed at them, they would also be injured and bleed. However, Foundation establishment cultivators were not like this. After experiencing the Qi refinement cultivation for a long time, cultivators would carve the special techniques and methods they cultivated into their bodies bit by bit, forming the foundation of their cultivation path. It was as if their body had been refined into a magic artifact. From then on, their flesh and blood body could unleash powerful might. Naturally, ordinary Qi refinement realm cultivators could not compare to them. Oh, senior sister Liu is going on the stage. At this time, there was a commotion among the disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall on the flying ship. They saw the valiant and heroic senior sister Liu Mulan step onto the wooden platform. Her opponent was a disciple of the Heaven and Earth Hall. Jiang Li narrowed his eyes. Looking at the order of combat, it seemed like the elders were stirring up trouble. They were forcing the disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall and the Heaven and Earth Hall to fight. Opposite senior sister, Liu stood a female cultivator. Jiang Li could already imagine the expressions of the elders in the long, clear hall who were waiting to watch the show. Jiang Li knew that senior sister Liu Mulan was very powerful. Before cultivating the dragon tortoise blood tattoo, if he did not use other methods, Jiang Li believed that he would not be able to defeat her. However, that female cultivator was definitely not a simple opponent. This was because the other party was the junior sister of their eldest senior brother, Chu Yunxuan. She was the youngest disciple of the Scripture Storage Valley Master, Taoist Wuxia. Doesn't that mean she can also use the Square Heaven Seal? Jiang Li could not help but ask another senior brother beside him. After the clone witnessed Xianxia's golden seal, he returned to the sect and consciously inquired about this information. The ultimate technique of the scripture storage valley was not a secret. It was quite famous in the cultivation world of the Great Mountain region. Countless fiendish cultivators were killed by it. However, the information he obtained through Yan Hong might not be true or incomplete, but it was always slightly different from the truth. After Jiang Li asked this question, he saw that his senior brother's expression was strange. Junior brother Jiang Li, the square heaven seal is an ultimate technique passed down by our scripture storage valley's valley master for generations. In the entire sect, besides the valley master and a few founders, only eldest senior brother Xianxia has the qualifications to cultivate it. When Jiang Li heard this, he did not understand but felt that it was impressive. So that Xianxia was not only the eldest senior brother of the sect, but he was also secretly appointed as the next valley master. This sort of information that could be considered common knowledge between the various halls in the inner sect was completely unknown to Jiang Li, who asked him to cultivate every day. His source of the information was largely dependent on Yan Hong. However, he was in the outer sect, and a lot of information could not be obtained by outer sect disciples. Haha, I see. That's good. Then senior sister Mulan's chances of winning will be higher. Jiang Li laughed and made this judgment. After all, he had personally experienced the power of the beast blood diagram. Others could not be like him and possess multiple beast blood tattoos at the same time. However, even with the augmentation of a single beast blood tattoo, it was still enough for senior sister Liu to surpass all cultivators of the same level. Furthermore, this beast blood tattoo could speed up her cultivation. It was a very practical secret technique. I'm not sure, but I know that Shen Ruoshi, Mulan might not be her match. The disciples of Elder He stood together, but their opinions were more uniform. Their opinion of senior sister Liu Mulan's battle was not too optimistic. The battle broke out. Senior sister Liu was a body cultivator, so she instantly took a step forward and threw a fist at the other party. Boom! The fist hit the other party. However, in the next moment, Shen Ruoshi's body exploded into dust. It was not real. A moment later, Shen Ruoshi appeared behind her again. Senior sister Mulan turned around and swept her leg across the air. Once again, she turned the other party into dust. After the dust dispersed, it quietly gathered again. The other party did not launch a sneak attack and only stood there with a smile, waiting for senior sister Mulan to raise her fist to attack. Dust exploded again and again. However, this kind of heavy fist that could split mountains and crack rocks could not cause any substantial damage to the other party. It could only exhaust her own stamina in vain. Jiang Li and the others looked at her from a third party's perspective. They could not find where Shen Ruoshi's real body was. It would be even more difficult for senior sister Liu Mulan. If Shen Ruoshi could continue like this, wouldn't she be invincible? As expected, the direct combat methods of body cultivators lacked variations. Once they encountered some magical methods, they would fall into a rather passive situation. This should be a rather advanced escape technique. He did not know if there was any way to crack it. But why did Shen Ruoshi not attack? If she wanted to win by wasting the stamina of a body cultivator, it would take a long time. Wait, no, she had already attacked. Jiang Li suddenly noticed that senior sister Liu Mulan's breathing had become heavier, and her physical condition was declining quickly at an unusual rate. I see, it's the dust. Every time Shen Ruoshi was beaten up, not all the dust would reform into her body. A portion of the dust would land on the arena and senior sister Liu. That dust probably had some secret power that severely suppressed her strength. Soon, senior sister Liu also noticed that the dust was the problem. She suddenly released her spiritual qi to blow away the dust. However, this time it was not effective at all. The dust was stuck to her body like super glue, unable to be shrugged off. You finally realized it. I thought that senior sister would take a longer time. When Shen Ruoshi saw senior sister Liu's action, she knew that she had discovered the problem. She covered her mouth with her hand, still showing that businessman-like smile. Then, she no longer hid it. With a wave of her hand, dust flew towards senior sister Liu. Every dust had a trace of earth attribute spiritual qi. If she was covered by this dust, she would definitely lose. Senior sister Liu instinctively came to this conclusion, but the entire ring was already covered in dust, and there was no place to stand at all. The only way out was to rise into the air. She stepped on the ground, intending to fly into the sky. However, when her foot left the ground for more than half a meter, a powerful pressure enveloped her. The entire ring seemed to be pulling her body, not letting her leave the ground. The layer of dust on her body seemed to have turned into a weight, pulling her back to the ground with a bang. The next moment, the dust filled the sky and directly wrapped senior sister Liu Mulan up like a clay person. It was as if she had become a terracotta soldier. She stood where she was, unable to move at all. At this moment, if Shen Ruoshi wanted to take her life, she could do it with a single thought. Senior sister Liu could not even use her trump card to burn her blood essence before she was defeated. Floating Battle Arena, 6th match. The winner is the Heaven and Earth Hall's disciple, Shen Ruoshi. Jiang Li did not expect senior sister Liu Mulan to actually lose in the first battle. There was nothing she could do against this powerful opponent. Jiang Li's heart sank. Sure enough, he could not underestimate the experts of the world. His current physique should be slightly stronger than senior sister Liu's, but it was limited. How could he deal with Shen Ruoshi in that situation? Wait a minute. He seemed to be in the Qi refinement realm. At the very least, he would not have to face her in this martial competition. Jiang Li had asked his senior brothers, and they said that they did not have a good solution. They only said that they would try their best to avoid the dust. However, the dust would cover most of the stage with a single explosion. If they wanted to avoid it, the difficulty level would be too high. Jiang Li knew the name of the technique that Shen Ruoshi used. Earth Dust Scripture. It was also one of the 4 great techniques of the Scripture Storage Valley, but the effects were practically unstoppable. Jiang Li finally understood why the Heaven and Earth Hall was called the Heaven and Earth Hall. This name sounded a little tacky, but the meaning behind it could make 99% of the cultivators of the Great Mountain drool. This was because Heaven represented the square heaven seal, while Earth represented the Earth Dust Scripture. The square heaven seal could only be learned by the sect master and the soon-to-be sect master. The Earth Dust Scripture was the Heaven and Earth Hall's true ultimate technique inheritance. Chapter 127, Double Breakthrough. Although senior sister Liu was defeated, the other party did not heavily injure her, so she did not suffer much injuries. It was just that after she returned, she was a little depressed and upset. The few disciples went up to comfort her. However, the few Foundation Establishment Realm senior brothers did not say that they wanted to beat Shen Ruoshi for her. Clearly, no one had the confidence. After all, the Earth Dust Scripture was especially effective against body cultivators. They did not know if their master, Elder He, had any useful suggestions. Senior sister Liu returned to wash her body while Jiang Li and the other disciples continued to watch the martial arts competition. There were many disciples from the Demon Vanquishing Hall who participated in the martial arts competition. Jiang Li and his fellow disciples watched the sunset together. The baskets of eggs had also been used up. Only then did the first day of the martial arts competition come to an end. It had to be said that the disciples of the Demon Vanquishing Hall often carried out missions to subdue demons. Their skill in combat was quite impressive. On the first day of the martial arts competition, overall, they had more wins than losses. Only when they met the disciples of the Heaven and Earth Hall would they be pressured or suppressed. This was because the disciples of the Heaven and Earth Hall did not have poor aptitudes. The ones they recruited were basically the most talented disciples among the new disciples every year. Of course, there were also disciples with top-grade spiritual roots from the other halls. It was just that they were not as many as the Heaven and Earth Hall of the Valley Master's lineage. This point could be seen from the fact that Xianxia, that top-grade spiritual root disciple, was not under the Valley Master, but was only a disciple of an ordinary heaven and earth hall elder. Even if not everyone among them knew the earth dust scripture, under the circumstances of age restriction, the faster cultivation speed brought about by high-grade spiritual roots would also allow them to form a considerable suppression towards the other disciples. However, geniuses were always scarce. While the heaven and earth hall adhered to the high requirements of the disciples, it naturally meant that the number of disciples was limited. In terms of number of disciples, the demon vanquishing hall had the absolute advantage. If the demon vanquishing hall and the heaven and earth hall fought in a group, their chances of winning were still very high. In addition, fast cultivation speed. They might be able to suppress others, but it was hard to say when faced against Jiang Li. Jiang Li grunted and returned to his luxurious residence to meditate. The spiritual qi in his body was already stirring, ready to break through at any moment. This cultivation speed was simply as if a cheat had been activated. Originally, when Jiang Li first entered the qi refinement realm, he had relied on the yin qi of the outer sect graveyard to increase the strength of his spiritual qi by 20–30% compared to cultivators of the same cultivation realm, so the might of his spell techniques was greater. Moreover, since the beginning of his cultivation, Jiang Li had never experienced the ordeal of painstakingly absorbing spiritual qi from the outside world bit by bit. He had the statuses of wood-yin infusion and accelerated qi nourishment on him all year round. They were basically providing the most suitable attribute spiritual qi into his body for refinement. After that, he obtained the status of spiritual qi infusion, which made his cultivation speed even faster. It had to be said that high-grade spirit stones were indeed high-grade. The purity of the spiritual qi inside was even higher than the wood-yin spiritual qi that Jiang Li had painstakingly cultivated. For a few months, Jiang Li only focused on qi refinement every day, refining the spiritual qi that continuously surged out of his body. While his cultivation soared, the strength of the spiritual qi also rose bit by bit under this kind of nourishment. Previously, he had roughly estimated that the strength of his spiritual qi was roughly twice that of cultivators of the same level. If two spell techniques collided with each other, his spell technique would definitely be able to crush his opponent. With such buffs, the difficulty of breaking through realms, which ordinary cultivators would scratch their heads in frustration, seemed to become insignificant in front of him. Soon he would break through to the late-stage qi refinement realm. At that time, the ghost wood art would produce some new changes. Focusing his mind, the ghost wood art, with the augmentation of several statuses, began to circulate crazily as if he was on a highway without any other cars. In his consciousness, a small ghostwood tree with lush leaves was gently swaying in the space that clearly could not have wind. The trunk of the ghostwood tree was about the thickness of an arm. Although it was no longer a sprout, it had not yet matured. If one observed carefully, they would discover that there was a small mound on the ground beside the ghostwood tree. Under this mound was none other than the ghost that had entered Jiang Li's consciousness through the demonic ape and was captured by the ghostwood tree roots. As he circulated the ghostwood art, Jiang Li could feel the ghostwood tree in his consciousness stirring. It was as if he had reached a certain limit. He only needed one last push to succeed. He gently took a breath, and with a thought, an iron ring on the dragon imprisoning lock that was originally emitting a faint light was immediately extinguished. One of the spiritual qi currents that were flowing towards the dragon imprisoning lock was temporarily cut off by him. In the next second, the spiritual qi in his body surged even more and instantly broke the barrier between minor realms. Jiang Li felt as if he was a patient who had been bedridden for 30 years. He stretched lazily, and his entire body felt comfortable all over. In his consciousness, the ghostwood tree grew rapidly as if time was accelerated. The height of the tree increased rapidly, the tree trunk became thicker, and the branches and leaves expanded to cover a wider and larger area. The roots under the soil were also continuously climbing deeper into the soil. About half an hour later, Jiang Li slowly opened his eyes and spat out a mouthful of air, causing it to spray out for over 30 m. It struck the wall and even forcefully scraped off a layer of dust. Was this the late-stage qi refinement realm? The quantity and strength of the spiritual qi had both increased by nearly 50%. In addition, the spiritual qi seemed to be different from before. Jiang Li closed his eyes to sense for a moment, and he had a slight understanding of the current changes in the ghost wood art. After some thought, he took out the coffin and threw it to the ground. The coffin opened, and inside was darkness that seemed to be able to devour everything. Jiang Li opened his palm. A ball of spiritual qi slowly appeared on his palm. However, it was not as scattered as usual. Instead, it condensed into a ball and slowly changed its shape. A moment later, dark green spiritual qi formed a translucent root in Jiang Li's palm. At the late-stage qi refinement realm, one did not need to use spell techniques. Just by using spiritual qi, one could already show some of the characteristics of the cultivation method. For example, this. Jiang Li stretched out his hand. The dark green spiritual qi root shot forward and grew, entering the coffin. Then the root curled and pulled. A faint black shadow was pulled out from the coffin by Jiang Li. This was a ghost that had been transformed from a soul. It could be seen with the naked eye. The 300,000 spirits in the coffin had already transformed drastically. Most of the souls had already been combined together again. Under the nourishment of the increasingly dense spiritual qi in the yin burial coffin, they had already transformed into initial-grade ghosts with a certain degree of combat ability. As for where this spiritual qi came from, that was naturally the large amount of high-grade spiritual qi that Jiang Li had continuously invested in the past few months. The 50 points of high-grade spiritual qi per second was fine for a short period of time. But as time passed, the sword cultivator clone and dragon imprisoning lock would suffer from indigestion. However, this coffin contained an inner space. Even if one could not absorb and use the spiritual qi, they could still transfer it directly into the space to store it. Therefore, most of the spiritual qi during this period of time had actually been stored in the coffin. With the yin burial special ability of the artifact, the high-grade spiritual qi became the yin burial spiritual qi that filled the internal space. The 300,000 souls had been nourished by the yin burial spiritual qi for a few months before they collectively evolved into stronger ghosts. How strong were these ghosts now? They were probably at the level where they could easily kill and eat humans alone, could fight with mortal Taoists without spiritual qi, and would be easily destroyed by a talisman of a true cultivator. It was not much different from the ghosts in mortal legends. However, although they were weak initial-stage ghosts, countless ants could bite an elephant to death. If he released all 300,000 ghosts, even if 10 Foundation establishment cultivators came, they would probably not be able to withstand it. This ghost was now bound by dark green spiritual qi roots. Pain flashed across its blurry ghost face from time to time, but it did not resist at all. Jiang Li was not at all worried that he would suffer a backlash from the ghosts. This was because, besides being a storage artifact, the main function of the coffin was still in the field of logistics. Its specialty was to refine various yin attribute ghosts and spirits, like the zombies, skeletons, ghosts, and others. The more yin burial spiritual qi these ghosts absorbed, the stronger the coffin's control over them. Moreover, the foundation of this group of ghosts was too weak. More than 95% of their strength came from Jiang Li. Not to mention now, even if all of them became ghost kings, they would be unable to resist his will. The spiritual qi root slowly retracted, pulling the ghost into his palm. Jiang Li only felt a chill run through his palm, and then this feeling flowed along his arm and quickly entered the space between his brows before vanishing. He closed his eyes and entered his consciousness again. A small bump appeared on the ground beside the tall ghostwood tree. Ghostwood, ghost within the wood. It nurtures a lonely and sinister ghost. After cultivating to the late-stage qi refinement realm, the special traits of the ghost wood art finally began to gradually appear. Now, Jiang Li was no longer in the state where ghosts had to enter his sea of consciousness for him to capture them. The current ghost wood art could already create spiritual qi tree roots and actively capture ghosts. Moreover, capturing ghosts and binding them under the roots could bring Jiang Li several other uses. Jiang Li stretched out his palm, and a layer of green light blossomed on it. The thin wooden armor suddenly started to grow, and it quickly covered his entire right hand. Although it was not very obvious, the strength of his spiritual qi had indeed increased again. Moreover, if he were to spend a little more time, the ghosts captured by the roots would transform into lumps that would adhere to the roots. If there were more of them, then it would greatly increase the amount of spiritual qi Jiang Li had. It could be considered a bonus to his qi. Of course, this effect was useless to him. He had never lacked spiritual qi since he started cultivating. Jiang Li did not care about anything else. He grabbed another 30 ghosts and dragged them into his body. He only stopped when he reached the limit of his current cultivation method. These 32 ghosts needed to be transformed into lumps on the roots before he could continue kidnapping more. Jiang Li was quite satisfied with his breakthrough to the late-stage qi refinement realm. He struck while the iron was hot and cultivated for the entire night. On the morning of the next day, Jiang Li opened his eyes. He got up and was about to leave when his expression changed. "Craig." A familiar voice sounded as Jiang Li's expression changed. He lowered his head to look. As expected, the limestone floor beneath his feet had already shattered into hundreds of pieces along with spider web-like patterns. He squeezed his palm, and the strength he felt increased again. Jiang Li pulled out his interface in a daze and took a look. The mid-stage body refinement realm, in the body cultivation column, had unknowingly turned into the late-stage body refinement realm. No wonder he felt such a huge reaction when he broke through previously. It turned out that not only had his qi refinement cultivation broken through, but his body cultivation had also reached the late stage. All right, with the 4 beast blood tattoos and the combination of many body refinement pills, his body cultivation speed was not inferior to that of qi refinement. It was a good thing that he had broken through to the late stage of both body refinement and qi refinement cultivation. However, this breakthrough was really not timely. They were still in the midst of the sect's martial arts competition. Jiang Li was really afraid that he would accidentally kill someone with this sudden breakthrough. Looking at the creaking ground, it was not impossible. It seemed that he had wasted a basket of eggs yesterday. However, it was too late to practice his punches on the mountain. Jiang Li scratched his head. He was quite vexed. After thinking for a long time, he suddenly looked at the dragon imprisoning lock around his waist. This thing might be of use. Swoosh! Under Jiang Li's will, the pitch-black chain instantly came to life and circled around his body like a nimble snake. It coiled from his waist to his arms. Finally, there were 2 cracking sounds. The shackles on both ends of the dragon imprisoning lock wrapped around Jiang Li's wrists. An invisible pressure enveloped him, causing his swelling strength to gradually fall. Under Jiang Li's control, the dragon imprisoning lock naturally did not unleash its strongest power directly. Instead, it suppressed his strength bit by bit, until Jiang Li felt that this level was something that he could barely accept. He took 2 more steps. At the very least, the limestone floor did not crack open. This way, he could temporarily endure the sudden boost in strength. There was really no one else who would shackle themselves like this. Jiang Li shook his head gloomily. After he went out, he did not directly go to the venue to watch the competition. He went to the scripture storage pavilion in his current state. He needed to find a body cultivation method that could help him control his strength. Previously, Jiang Li already had a lot of cultivation tasks: body cultivation, qi refinement, and listening to the Heart Sutra. Each of them required a lot of time, so he simply could not find any free time. Furthermore, this was under the condition that he had handed over the matters of inscribing runes, learning how to forge weapons, and cultivating movement techniques to the parallel mind. Therefore, he had previously thought that it would be enough to familiarize himself with controlling strength for a few days. There was no need to learn a spell technique as it was time-consuming. However, the continuous loss of control of his powers told him that such situations would likely happen in the future. If he had to familiarize himself with it every time he lost control, then the time it would take would be more than learning one spell technique. After passing through the inner sect, Jiang Li did not encounter the embarrassment he had when he was still an outer sect disciple. From time to time, he would encounter a group of registered disciples patrolling the area, and they had to bow to Jiang Li. Soon, he knocked on the metal door embedded in the mountain wall. In the scripture storage pavilion, Elder Li was still drinking alone behind the counter. Speaking of which, Jiang Li still had one more token that he had obtained from the scripture imparting hall when he joined the inner sect. He had to find a time to use it. After bowing towards Elder Li, Jiang Li went to the bookshelf in the body cultivation area and started to search. It was obvious that there were fewer people in this body cultivation area. The floating dust on the bookshelves were much thicker than other bookshelves. Then, as he flipped through it, Jiang Li's expression fell even more. It seemed like in history, there were not many cases like him where one's strength was unable to be controlled due to rapid growth. Therefore, after searching for a long time, he did not find any technique that he liked in the body cultivation area. This was quite awkward. In fact, logically speaking, increasing the mind attribute was the best solution for failing to control his strength. Cultivation methods like the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra were very suitable for Jiang Li. As long as he retracted his sword cultivator clone and obtained another mental enlightenment, he would quickly master this portion of overflowing power. Or perhaps he could choose to keep a parallel mind in his body to help Jiang Li control it better. Not only could it help in controlling his body, he could even multitask and scheme better in battles. However, the problem was that his Bodhisattva Heart Sutra was still not at the level where it could create two parallel minds. As for the sword cultivator clone, he could not easily abandon it for the time being. Therefore, he could not rely on the Heart Sutra for the time being. He had to find a strength-controlling technique instead. Jiang Li refused to believe in fate and searched for a long time, but he still did not obtain anything. Elder Li, Elder Li. Helpless, Jiang Li could only return to the counter and wake up Elder Li, who was taking a nap. The other party was not angry. After Jiang Li told him about his needs, he thought for a moment and sized Jiang Li up before standing up and walking towards the depths of the scripture storage pavilion. Jiang Li's eyes lit up. From the looks of it, there was a solution. His footsteps followed closely behind Elder Li as they passed through the bookshelves. Soon, they returned to the body cultivation area. Jiang Li was slightly puzzled. Didn't he already search this place thoroughly? Could it be that he had missed out something? Elder Li stopped in front of a bookshelf. His body swayed as if he was about to fall asleep at any moment. After swaying for a long time, Elder Li finally held the bookshelf to steady his body and groggily searched the bookshelf. Chapter 128, Overlord Body. During this period of time, Elder Li knocked down a few books from the bookshelf, before finally taking out an exquisite-looking booklet from a certain corner and handing it to Jiang Li. Overlord Body Art. There were only 3 words on the booklet. This spell technique sounded very fierce, but Jiang Li did not seem very happy holding it. Jiang Li knew about this body cultivation method. It was said to be a rather brilliant technique for taking hits. Although it was called the Overlord Body Art, many people called it the immovable Overlord Body Art. Of course, this was not a praise but mockery. This Overlord Body Art was like a semi-finished pill formula. While it was powerful, it was also accompanied by huge flaws that were hard to overcome. When using this Overlord body, one could neither attack nor move. One would become a sandbag and stand there to be beaten. Jiang Li was slightly speechless. Did this Elder Li drink too much and take the wrong thing? However, when Jiang Li looked at Elder Li again, he had already staggered far away. Helpless, Jiang Li flipped open the booklet and read the detailed introduction of the spell technique. So this was the Overlord body art. As Jiang Li watched, the originally disdainful expression on his face slowly became serious. Perhaps it did suit him after all. This Overlord body art was a technique that combined strength and qi to focus on defense. Through this spell technique, the user could contract their strength and spiritual qi in a certain ratio and circulate them to the surface of the body to form a defensive layer. The more spiritual qi and strength contracted, the stronger the defense formed on the surface of the body. It was a special method to exchange attack for defense. Right to body cultivators, spiritual qi was also vital to them. Of course, body cultivation methods still required spiritual qi to cultivate. Otherwise, if one only relied on body tempering, how could he be called a body cultivator? That was a martial artist from the mortal world, a mortal martial arts technique. Jiang Li took a look. The effects of this Overlord body art should be quite powerful. The method to combine spiritual qi and physical strength was extremely brilliant. If he defended with his full strength, the intensity of the attack he suffered had to be at least more than twice that of Jiang Li's own before it could break his defense. In terms of quality, this was already quite good. However, after executing this spell technique, the characteristics of being unable to move made the value of this Overlord body art decrease greatly. Defending without retaliating meant defeat. Cultivators could not rely on this to exhaust their opponents to death. Jiang Li flipped through it again and noticed that this technique was divided into 4 parts: strength control, qi control, combination, and secret cultivation. Elder Li's intention was to let Jiang Li focus on the strength control chapter. This Overlord body art emphasized on making cultivators contract the power they released and spread it around their bodies on average to deal with external attacks. When he could control his physical strength to contract and release at will, his current problem would be resolved. However, as he read on, Jiang Li's gaze was attracted by another description of the Overlord body art. In the Secret Cultivation chapter of the Overlord body art, it described that after the Overlord body art reached the 8th level, cultivators could store some of the strength and spiritual qi they usually accumulated on the surface of their bodies. At that time, this Overlord body art would show a sudden boost in power. The user could maintain the highest level of Overlord body defense without reducing their strength, spiritual qi, and speed. In other words, before the 8th layer of the Overlord body art, it was only a technique, but after the 8th layer, it could be considered a status. It could be said that there were also many flaws. He had to prepare before each use, the duration was short, and the expenditure was huge. It was not worth paying such a price to defend for just a short moment. But in Jiang Li's case, was this another godly technique? As Jiang Li became stronger, his physical defense would also become stronger along with his physique. However, his armament hard skin and hardened skin were gradually unable to keep up with his growth. There was naturally no problem in catching a Qi Refinement Realm flying sword. However, after Jiang Li tried it, he was already unable to completely defend against the Foundation Establishment flying sword of the Sword Cultivator clone. This did not match Jiang Li's expectations for his strength. This way, this Overlord body art might become an even stronger substitute. After returning to the counter and obtaining the jade slip of the Overlord body art, Elder Li took his inner sect disciple token and charged some sect contribution points. Jiang Li had already entered the inner sect for 4 to 5 months. Every month, the contribution points distributed by the sect would be directly transferred to his token. Previously, he had participated in a period of demon extermination missions, so the contribution points he obtained was naturally quite a lot. Jiang Li would occasionally enter the scripture storage pavilion to learn a few spell techniques, but the contribution points distributed every month were simply too much. This was another huge difference between inner sect disciples and outer sect disciples. After the protection period, outer sect disciples had to complete a certain number of missions on time to pay the sect contribution points that were deducted every month. As for inner sect disciples, they did not need to do anything to obtain the resources that outer sect disciples desperately fought for. Jiang Li sighed for a moment about his old days before leaving the scripture storage pavilion and arriving at the bustling martial arts venue. He flew into the airship, where the demon vanquishing hall was located, with the dragon imprisoning lock. The chains on Jiang Li's body were not obvious because of his clothes, but the shackles on his wrists were not easy to cover up. "Junior brother Jiang Li, what are you doing?" Therefore, those senior brothers and sisters naturally noticed Jiang Li's unusual behavior with a single glance. The shackles and chain looked familiar. When they had just entered the sect, the dragon imprisoning lock had once been tied to their ankles, binding them to fight the demon beast to the death. Of course, they all succeeded in the end, and obtained the beast blood diagram's inheritance. But now that they saw the indestructible chain, they still felt a little fearful. "Oh, I accidentally broke through earlier. My body is a little out of control. I'm using it to temporarily suppress my strength." When Jiang Li said this, everyone noticed that the aura on his body was obviously much stronger than the day before. After not seeing him for an entire night, Jiang Li did not even say anything and broke through without any warning. "Oh, you broke through. That's pretty good. Continue to work hard and build your foundation as soon as possible." The senior brothers habitually encouraged him. After a moment, they reacted. "Oh, wait, when was the last time you broke through? Did you break through in body refinement, or did you break through in chi refinement?" The senior brothers and sisters suddenly recalled that Jiang Li seemed to be a new disciple who had just entered the sect this year. Moreover, based on the time, they knew that their master had taken in this junior brother, Jiang Li, not long ago. Previously, he had been at the mid-stage chi refinement and body refinement realm, but now, no matter how they looked at it, he should be at the late stage of the chi refinement realm. Their expressions were a little complicated. Wasn't that Xianxia who fought with Jiang Li yesterday, a top-grade spiritual root disciple, who had entered the sect at the same time as Jiang Li? The other party was clearly only at the mid-stage chi refinement realm, and was still quite a distance away from breaking through. What was going on with this junior brother of theirs? His body cultivation was complementing his chi refinement. Did the beast blood diagram have such an effect? In 2 years, would he reach the foundation establishment realm? They were all silent for a moment. It was not that they suspected Jiang Li, but they were a little conflicted in their hearts. Jiang Li's rapid growth was after he became Elder He's disciple. The rest of his growth was basically under the watch of the people from the demon vanquishing hall. There was no problem at all. At most, it was Elder He who gave him special treatment. This was understandable. It was naturally a good thing for this little junior brother to be a genius, but suddenly having a junior who could catch up to them made them carry quite a bit of pressure. If they were to be surpassed by their junior brother one day, they did not dare to imagine how Elder He would deal with them at that time. The martial arts competition below continued, but Jiang Li's mind was mostly focused on cultivating the overlord body art. After asking a few questions from his senior brothers and sisters, he stood at the railing of the flying ship and tried out the overlord body art. From time to time, a thin layer of spiritual chi would surge on his body. His muscles bulged everywhere, as if a rat was stuffed under his skin. A terrifying physical force swam around his entire body. In the process of circulating his strength throughout his body, his strength and control also increased bit by bit. The advantage of the strength control chapter was that he did not need the assistance of other tools and would not affect the outside world too much. Whether he was standing, sitting, or lying down, he could cultivate. Moreover, it was a professional strength control technique after all. This kind of cultivation was even more effective and faster than ramming mountains or rolling eggs. The 10 Qi refinement realm battle rings on the ground had already ended the session at noon the next day. However, the floating rings in the sky were delayed until night. On the one hand, the reason was that there was only one arena, and there were more matches in the Foundation Establishment Realm martial arts competition. On the other hand, the quality of high-level cultivators was stronger in all aspects. Unless there was a great disparity in strength, it was difficult to quickly determine a winner. The sect was not in a hurry to begin the second round of the Qi refinement realm. It was only after the first round of the Foundation Establishment Disciples ended that the second round began on the third day. There were a total of 272 Qi refinement realm disciples participating in the martial arts meeting. After the first round, the losers would be eliminated and the winners would be left behind. There were still 136 left. It was still Battle Arena A, and it still felt as light as the wind and clouds. Jiang Li stood there with chains around his body and shackles on his hands, waiting for his opponent to ascend the stage. Jiang Li's number was 271, the last number among all the Qi refinement realm disciples. According to the rules of the battle, as long as he did not lose, he would continue to fight on this stage. The competitor on the other side did not make Jiang Li wait long. Not long later, a figure walked onto the ring, and then the second, third, and fourth competitors. In this instant, 4 figures in white disciple clothes stood before Jiang Li. A moment later, the 4 of them looked up together and saw that they were wearing the same white mask with no facial features. On the mask, the words sour, sweet, bitter, spicy were written. Sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy. This person had quite a personality. With just a glance, Jiang Li understood what his opponent was good at. The puppet technique of the Mystic Gate Hall. Jiang Li had seen this senior brother's battle before. The rune mechanisms hidden in the puppets were impossible to guard against, and the main body was hidden among the puppets. In any case, his previous enemy had not been able to find his true identity, even after exerting all his strength and leaving the arena. Demon Vanquishing Hall Jiang Li. Jiang Li was the first to cup his hands and announce his name, and then he raised his head to look over as if he wanted to rely on his voice to find the main body that was about to speak. Mystic Gate Hall Ban Kai, X4. However, these words were said by the 4 masked puppets at the same time. Obviously, his opponent was similar to Jiang Li in that he had already cultivated the 5 senses technique to the level of mastering all 5 senses. By relying on the tongue, not only could the puppets speak, he could even utilize them to chant spells. Senior brother, has Elder Wang Senki been well? Ever since he entered the sect, Elder Wang of the Mystic Gate Hall had been taking good care of him. When he met the disciples of the Mystic Gate Hall, he naturally had to ask. Hihi ho ha ha kik. Junior brother, have you experienced the sourness, sweetness, bitterness, and spiciness of the mortal world tilde? The disciple of the Mystic Gate Hall paid no attention to Jiang Li's greeting. The 4 masked puppets emitted strange laughs respectively, and then they started to set up formations and play games. This caused Jiang Li to be rather speechless. Wasn't it just a few puppets? Why did it seem like he was going to be sent to hell? As such, Jiang Li relaxed the bones in his body and intended to play with the other party. Seriously speaking, senior brother, letting me know where your true body is actually for your own good. Otherwise, the probability of death this time is 25%. As the gong sounded, Jiang Li suddenly spoke in a sinister manner. As soon as he finished speaking, his robust figure had already vanished on the spot. Bang! Countless wooden fragments flew everywhere. The masked man standing at the back had already been pierced through by Jiang Li's claws. What? How can he be so fast? The remaining 3 masked puppets were stunned by the sudden change in events. They hurriedly turned their heads to look at Jiang Li as if the 3 masks had terrified expressions under them. Jiang Li, on the other hand, was calm. He withdrew his right hand from the chest of the puppet, and then his eyes swept over the remaining 3 masked men, causing Ban Kai's chest to constrict as if a palm would pass through it in the next moment. Senior brother Ban Kai, your probability of death this time is 33%. Jiang Li casually tossed the ruined puppet to the side, and then his figure vanished once more. As he watched Jiang Li's figure vanish, the heart of the Mystic Gate Hall disciple seemed to have skipped a beat. Crag, crag. A sharp voice sounded, and Jiang Li appeared behind another puppet. This time, he grabbed the puppet by the neck and directly tore its head off its body. He really did seem to have the potential to become a crazy murderer. The disciple of the Mystic Gate Hall looked over and saw Jiang Li casually throw away the puppet's head. The sound of the wooden head hitting the ground made him feel dizzy. If he was unlucky, then wouldn't he be the one whose head was torn off? His neck felt cold. Ban Kai felt that it was extremely difficult to swallow his saliva. A large amount of cold sweat had already soaked through his clothes. Senior brother, the probability of death is 50% now. Jiang Li's words sounded faintly again. His naive eyes swept across the remaining two masked puppets, preparing to launch another fatal attack in the next moment. Wait a moment, I admit defeat, I admit defeat. The disciple of the Mystic Gate Hall could no longer endure this feeling of imminent death. He no longer cared about showing off. He tore off his mask as quickly as possible and hurriedly admitted defeat. However, in the blink of an eye, Jiang Li's figure had actually vanished once more. This scene caused him to feel as if his soul had left his body. Slam! A hand landed on the disciple's shoulder as his face instantly turned pale. Sorry, I was just joking. Senior brother, don't mind me. Jiang Li's words sounded in the other party's ears. If not for his legs already turning soft, he would have jumped more than 3 meters high on the spot. After a long time, he finally heard Jiang Li clearly. It turned out that Jiang Li was only joking and did not really want to kill him. However, his pale face still could not recover for a long time. He wanted to cry but had no tears. If he had known earlier, he would not have acted mysterious. Now he was frightened badly. However, this Qi Refinement Realm junior brother was also ridiculously powerful, right? Jiang Li was naturally just scaring the other party earlier. No matter how similar the other party's puppet was, it was impossible for his heart to completely stop beating. With the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, such subtle sounds were no different from beating a gong. In fact, he had long identified the other party's actual body and had deliberately frightened him into admitting defeat. After this battle, this senior brother of the Mystic Gate Hall did not even manage to unleash a single attack. Instead, he lost 2 puppets. This was indeed quite tragic. Chapter 129, Mad Disciples. Without any surprise, Jiang Li won the battle. However, as the competition continued to progress, the fights in the other arenas became more and more intense. All sorts of mystical spell techniques appeared one after another. They were truly marvelous. Jiang Li stood on the flying ship and watched. He had already discovered several disciples with dual-attribute spiritual roots in a row. He had even discovered a Qi Refinement Realm disciple with a variant lightning attribute spiritual root. That lightning attribute spiritual root disciple looked to be around 18 or 19 years old. Lightning flickered on his palms, and as soon as he went on stage, he unleashed the 5-heart lightning. Whoever faced him was quite unlucky. It could be said that in the entire Qi Refinement Realm arena, besides Jiang Li's side, the fastest to win the round was him. According to others, this person's experience in life was comparable to a child of Providence. It was said that he was once an orphan who did not have enough to eat or wear. He was picked up by an elder by chance. At first, they only thought that he was a seedling with spiritual root aptitude. Seeing that he was pitiful, they brought him back to take a look. If his aptitude was good, they could take him under their wing. If he was tested to have a medium grade and below spiritual root, he could have a good life in the outer sect. However, they did not expect to test that he had a high-grade aptitude, and it was a variant lightning attribute spiritual root. This variant attribute spiritual root was not on the same level as a dual-attribute spiritual root. It possessed powerful might and unpredictable spell techniques that could often crush cultivators of the same level. As a result, the cultivation world generally tacitly agreed that a variant spiritual root could directly raise the potential by one level. This point could be seen from Elder Duan Shuang's performance back then. He could still persist for so long despite facing the lightning tribulation. Duan Shuang, who was thought to be a genius and the backbone of the Demon Vanquishing Hall, had a variant ice attribute spiritual root. The lightning spiritual root specialized in killing, while the ice spiritual root specialized in defense. This lightning spiritual root cultivator was probably even more terrifying in the arena. After the second round of fights ended, that senior brother with a lightning spiritual root suddenly raised his head from the platform and glanced at Jiang Li. The gazes of the two of them almost collided in the air. If this continued, then the two of them would clash sooner or later. Clearly, both sides were extremely confident in their own strength. After the second round ended, half of the 166 Qi Refinement Realm disciples would be eliminated on the fourth day. Jiang Li waved his hand and parted ways with his fellow disciples. He did not return to the Demon Vanquishing Hall with them, but walked casually through the sect. He wanted to see if he could maintain his mobility while executing the Overlord body art. He was different from ordinary cultivators. Apart from his own strength, his legs also contained the power of the ancient armored horse talisman. If his feet could not move, could he move using the power of the armored horse? It was not entirely impossible to release a portion of the armored horse divine travel's power. Jiang Li tried to use it as he walked. Along the way, he stumbled occasionally. He either stepped on the ground to create a hole or jumped 7 to 8 meters high into the sky. Not only was his speed extremely slow, but his actions also looked strange and weird. Jiang Li paid no attention to the gazes of the others. With his status as the head elder's disciple of the Demon Vanquishing Hall, no one would look for trouble with him because of the pits on the ground. Unknowingly, Jiang Li arrived at the outer sect. His appearance attracted even more attention. In the last 2 rounds of the martial arts competition, Jiang Li's performance was very eye-catching. He defeated his opponents cleanly and quickly. There was even one opponent who was frightened and took the initiative to surrender. As a new disciple, he was one of the only 2 mid-stage Qi refinement cultivators participating in the martial competition. Jiang Li's performance undoubtedly showed that he was a huge dark horse. Now that Jiang Li had appeared here, he was naturally recognized by many people. However, due to their inherent impression of inner sect disciples, they moved far away from Jiang Li and did not dare to disturb him at all. Apart from a group of people. Since he had come to the outer sect, Jiang Li intended to go see the outer sect graveyard that had once assisted him in Qi refinement and provided great help to his early-stage cultivation. It was already quite late in the day, but Jiang Li saw living people here unexpectedly. 8 outer sect disciples were sitting or lying on a tombstone at the edge of the outer sect graveyard. Their eyes were hollow, and their faces were filled with a satisfied smile that made people feel uncomfortable. They were not cleaning the tombstones, nor were they disciples who had accepted the sect's corpse-burying mission. What were they doing? Jiang Li looked at them and felt that something was not right. He went forward with a strange feeling. "Hey, what are you looking at? Who let you come over? Get lost immediately, otherwise we'll kill you." "Get lost? No, you still have to compensate us. Hand over all the spirit stones on you, otherwise we'll bury you together with this guy under our feet." There were 8 outer sect disciples sitting or lying around the tombstones, 6 men and 2 women. Their faces looked as pale as paper, and their eyes were sunken. All of them looked like they had been physically expended. At first, their eyes were hollow, and their bodies did not move at all. If not for their heaving chests, Jiang Li would have thought that they were actually dead. However, they seemed to be extremely sensitive to all changes in the outside world, be it light or sound. When Jiang Li approached, Some sounds came from beneath his feet, and a bit of sunlight was blocked out. These 8 outer sect disciples immediately became anxious and uneasy. Their chests heaved violently, as if Jiang Li had committed a grave sin by approaching them. They felt extremely angry at him. The 2 male disciples stood up first and shouted at Jiang Li while cursing. Then the noise completely woke up the other 6 people. All of them stood up and shouted at Jiang Li to get lost. One of the female cultivators even wanted Jiang Li to hand over all the spirit stones he had and planned to rob him before letting him leave. Jiang Li lowered his head and looked at the clothes on his body. It was indeed the white inner sect disciple uniform. Did these 8 people take the wrong medicine? What nerves did they have? They actually dared to speak to him like this, and they even wanted to rob an inner sect senior brother. Were they afraid that the seniors in the outer sect graveyard would be lonely, so they wanted to go and accompany them? Such insolence! Jiang Li waved his right hand, and Yinwood attribute spiritual qi formed 8 palms that slapped the 8 people who were still howling madly. A series of slaps sounded. The 8 people were directly slapped flying by the spiritual qi palm. They turned 720 degrees in the air before falling to the ground. Their cheeks were puffed up, and blood flowed out of one ear, eye, and nose. None of them could remain conscious. What is this? After teaching them a lesson, Jiang Li saw 2 porcelain bottles and a stack of leaves that he did not recognize. Name: green spore powder. Type: material. Grade: low-grade yellow rank. Note: 1 foot in the immortal palace, 1 foot in the underworld. Name: bitter mulberry tree leaf. Type: trash. Grade: none. Note: the leaves of the bitter mulberry tree can be used to alleviate hunger. There was no specific name on the 2 porcelain bottles, nor was there any symbol of any sect. After Jiang Li threw out a few appraisals, he obtained the answer. It seemed that the stack of leaves did not have any practical use. The problem was most likely the green spore powder. Jiang Li thought for a moment before the spiritual qi in his hand surged out and transformed into a dark light. He raised his hand and struck the head of one of the mad disciples. Chapter 130. Green-robed immortal and elderly. The dark light that Jiang Li struck out entered the outer sect disciple's head. A thin, pale green and translucent line floated in the air and connected Jiang Li's finger to the disciple's head. After waiting silently for a few minutes, Jiang Li hooked his finger, and the green threads pulled out the black light that had entered the other party's head. This black light was none other than the ghost that Jiang Li had captured. At the late-stage qi refinement realm, Jiang Li could already use the ghost wood art to summon a few ghosts to serve him. The green line was the ghost wood art's binding on the ghost, preventing it from escaping even if it left Jiang Li's consciousness. It could only obediently work for him. This ghost had a certain ability to read minds. Although it was not strong, it could still be used. Jiang Li sent it into the brain of the disciple in front of him to see if he could read any useful memories. After pulling the ghost back into his sea of consciousness, some fragmented memories were quickly transmitted. There were not many memory fragments captured by the ghost, and it was far from reaching the level of the skill, Mayfly's dream. This ghost's ability was quite similar to telephone scams. It could only make up stories and bluff people. Circulating the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra that could even take over a person's life, Jiang Li quickly went through the memory fragments of the disciple in front of him. All the meaningless content was abandoned, leaving only some content that Jiang Li was interested in. Green-robed immortal. What a nice name, but is there such a forbidden drug in the cultivation world? Jiang Li held the 2 small porcelain bottles in his hand and recalled the few memory fragments stolen by the ghost. When taking this drug, one would feel as if they were floating in the air. After stopping, they would feel muddle-headed. This was an extremely addictive and vicious forbidden drug. It was fine for cultivators above the foundation establishment realm. Their powerful bodies could help them resist the addiction and dependence on the drug. As long as their wills were a little stronger, they could at most get rid of their headache for a week. However, for Qi Refinement Realm disciples, touching this thing could cause them to be trapped forever. That kind of reliance on drugs that could make people's minds go crazy was not easily overcome. After Jiang Li finished reading the memory fragment, he looked at a thin and tall figure lying on the ground. After thinking for a moment, he did not choose to slap him to death. Instead, he waved his hand and used his spiritual qi to open the disciple's mouth. He took out 7 or 8 waste pills from his bosom and stuffed them in. This disciple's body twitched and trembled while unconscious, and his originally pale face became even darker and darker. His body already began to emit a disgusting aura, as if he was beyond cure and was about to die at any moment. This was the leader of the group that was snorting the spore powder called Green-Robed Immortal. This thin and tall man had met a few rogue cultivators in a market when he was out on a mission. Then, he got addicted to Green-Robed Immortal. How many spirit stones could an outer sect disciple have? After he became addicted, it was just like what Jiang Li had heard in his previous life. He exhausted his spirit stones and was at his wit's end. In the end, he started to drag people down and use them to get more drugs. The other 7 people lying on the ground had been tricked by him through some methods before they were finally tainted by this green-robed immortal. People like him deserve to die. After consuming these few waste pills, the amount of this pill poison was enough to cause irreversible damage to this guy's cultivation and spiritual root. Moreover, the pill poison would be stubborn for at least 100 years. He would never be able to make a comeback in this life, until he died painfully under the torture of the pill poisoning. After taking away all the green spore powder on them, Jiang Li ignored them and continued to walk towards the center of the graveyard. However, today, this godforsaken place seemed especially lively. From afar, Jiang Li saw a tall figure standing in front of him. No one knew what he was doing. Could it be that one of the brothers in the graveyard had turned into a zombie? Jiang Li quickly rejected this thought because the other party's clothes were neat and tidy. Clearly, he was not a dirty zombie. However, he did not have any fear and directly walked over. This was his target location after all. He could not just retreat when he saw someone he did not know. The more he walked in, the more familiar Jiang Li felt. Wasn't the place where the figure stood where Jiang Li had cultivated the ghostwood art back then? This figure was indeed not a zombie. From the back, it looked to be a middle-aged man of medium build. The edges of his Taoist robe were faded and had turned white. Jiang Li had never seen a cultivator dressed like this, but from the oppressive feeling coming from his body, Jiang Li was certain that he was at least a core formation cultivator. Since the other party could enter the sect easily, he was most likely an elder of the scripture storage valley. This disciple has passed by this place and disturbed you. Elder, I seek forgiveness. Jiang Li cupped his hands and took a few steps forward. He finally saw the other party's face from the side. His facial features looked ordinary and even a little old. He did not look like a very powerful person. Only his sharp and straight eyebrows were facing the sky, making him look very heroic. Yes, this graveyard is not a good place. Don't stay here any longer. Leave. The elder glanced at Jiang Li and reminded him to leave quickly. Jiang Li did not mind the other party's reminder. To other disciples, this graveyard might not be beneficial to their bodies because of the yin qi, but to Jiang Li, it was simply like he had returned home. Elder, what are you looking at? Following the other party's gaze, the outer sect graveyard was corroded by the yin qi to the point that not a single blade of grass grew. 15 tree saplings had grown out at some point in time. In Jiang Li's eyes, these sprouts were even more familiar. Every day, he cultivated qi refinement and visualized the same thing. These are ghostwood trees. Elder, is there something wrong with these ghostwood trees? Jiang Li immediately felt a little embarrassed. He knew what this elder was looking at. At this moment, he suddenly had a bad feeling. It was just like when he was young and hid his paper after he scored a 0. The elder glanced at Jiang Li once more. Perhaps it was because of the inner sect disciple uniform he wore, but he opened his mouth and explained to Jiang Li. The yin qi in this outer sect graveyard is very heavy. I wonder who planted 15 ghostwood trees here and set up a feng shui wood yin array. Recently, there have been frequent zombie transformations and ghosts causing trouble in this graveyard, disturbing the outer sect. I wonder who did this and what their intentions are. This elder spoke with a slight accent as he looked at the ghostwood tree array in front of him with a serious expression. In the sect, Elder Lin was originally in seclusion all year round to cultivate. However, recently, there were frequent accidents in the outer sect graveyard and many disciples had been injured. It was naturally not difficult for sect elders and inner sect disciples to deal with these new ghosts. However, it was as if the graveyard had been on stimulants recently, producing ghosts frequently. The others did not find the reason and could not really let Foundation establishment cultivators camp all year round for a graveyard. Therefore, they invited Elder Lin, a professional, to help solve the problem of the graveyard. This Elder Lin was really capable. He was the one who designed and improved the layout of the outer sect graveyard. The rule of stuffing copper coins into the mouths of the dead to suppress the zombie transformation was also his suggestion to the sect. As an expert, he quickly found the problem. These ghostwood trees that had been planted were the culprits. However, he was still a little puzzled. Although these 15 sprouts had set up a feng shui wood yin array, based on his experience, they should still be far from reaching the extent of gathering such dense yin qi. To reach this state, one would need at least 15 ghostwood trees over 50 years old. Could there be another secret in this graveyard? When Jiang Li heard this, he could not help but break out in a cold sweat. If he did not guess wrong, this matter was probably related to him. Cough, cough, elder, this disciple might be able to answer you. Jiang Li scolded himself for having a bad memory. He thought for a moment and summoned up his courage to speak to the other party awkwardly. With a wave of his hand, he sent out Wood Yin's spiritual qi. Under his spiritual qi, cracking sounds of roots breaking could be heard from the ground. Jiang Li was stunned, and then he increased the output of his spiritual qi. Then the soil beneath the 15 ghostwood trees suddenly flipped up. One after another, a total of 15 thick ghostwood trees were pulled out from the ground. However, the ghostwood tree wooden stakes were already very different from when Jiang Li had buried them in the ground. Many thin roots grew out of the tree bark, and the 15 ghostwood tree saplings grew from these tree trunks. These ghostwood tree wooden stakes that had no roots were actually revived under the nourishment of the yin qi in the graveyard. Wood Yin's spiritual qi, did you bury these ghostwood trees? When Elder Lin saw this scene, how could he not know the problem? It turned out that the secret was buried under the ground. Elder, these ghostwood trees were buried for my cultivation training previously. It's just that after I entered the inner sect, I was busy cultivating and accidentally forgot about them. Elder Lin was speechless after hearing Jiang Li's explanation. He had wasted his time thinking there was an enemy attack. There was no such thing as a hidden plot. It was just a disciple who had forgotten to clean up the mess after cultivating, resulting in this mess. If Jiang Li was still an outer sect disciple at this moment, this matter would be a huge issue. Any punishment from the sect would be able to make him suffer from the consequences. Fortunately, he was now the disciple of the head elder of the Demon Vanquishing Hall, Elder He. Thus, this matter would only be a misunderstanding that was not worth mentioning. These yin attribute ghostwood trees are very dangerous if left in the graveyard. Don't be so reckless in the future. You can deal with them yourself. Sure enough, this elder did not say much, and he only gave Jiang Li a few words of advice. This disciple knows his mistake. Thank you, elder. Jiang Li released the dragon imprisoning lock on his body and coiled it around the 15 ghostwood trees that had been reborn, binding them together. After the 15 ghostwood trees were tied together, they were almost the size of a small mountain. In his previous life, large trucks were needed to transport them. However, the dragon imprisoning lock glowed slightly. Under Jiang Li's immense strength, it pulled back the ghostwood trees and carried them on his shoulder. The soil beneath his feet caved in, but Jiang Li acted exceptionally calm and collected. It was as if this bit of weight was nothing at all. "Are you a body cultivator?" Elder Lin looked at Jiang Li's actions, and his expression could not help but change slightly. It was rare for a body cultivator in the body refinement realm to have such strength. After Jiang Li gave an affirmative answer, he could not help but reveal a slightly regretful expression. However, it was not pity for Jiang Li, but for himself. Elder Lin had been living with corpses all year round and knew nothing about female cultivators. Therefore, he had no clue about matters like Dao companions and children. Furthermore, in recent years, although he had been cultivating bitterly in seclusion, he had no hope of breaking through in his cultivation. Therefore, he gradually had the thought of taking in a disciple to pass on all that he had learned. After he came out of seclusion, the Valley Master had told him that there was a disciple with a dual-attribute wood-yin spiritual root who was very suitable for him. It was just that he had unfortunately missed out on it because he was in seclusion and had already lost to the head of the Demon Vanquishing Hall. How could he not guess Jiang Li's identity at this point? "I saw that your spiritual qi is the dual-attribute wood-yin. What cultivation method did you learn? What is your current realm?" Although it was already impossible to take him in as a disciple, Elder Lin still asked Jiang Li out of concern. After all, there were very few cultivators with a wood-yin spiritual root. It was rare to meet one, and it could be considered fate. He had to give Jiang Li some pointers. "I cultivate the ghostwood art, and am currently only at the late-stage qi refinement realm." Jiang Li answered truthfully. His voice was calm, and the heavy burden on his shoulders did not affect him much. "Ghostwood art, it's quite a good cultivation method. Then the one you released was your ghost servant." How could Jiang Li not know that the elder had witnessed the scene at the edge of the graveyard, with unknown methods earlier? "Don't worry, they deserve to die. I won't blame you for this." When he saw Jiang Li's expression change, the elder hurriedly consoled Jiang Li and told him not to worry because of this. Jiang Li was naturally not worried, but the other party seemed to understand his cultivation method very well. This made him feel a little puzzled. "Elder, forgive me for being presumptuous. May I know your name?" "My name is Lin Fengying. You can call me Elder Lin." At this moment, Jiang Li understood that this was the inheritor of the corpse manipulation clan, who had once been most suitable to be his master, Elder Lin. As they both had a wood-yin attribute spiritual root, it was natural for the other party to study the other two wood-yin attribute cultivation methods in the valley. Jiang Li hurriedly put down the ghostwood trees and bowed once more before calling out, "Elder Lin, I have something to ask." Jiang Li's master was only good at body refinement. It was really difficult for him to be of help in qi refinement cultivation. Now that he met Elder Lin, how could he let this chance slip by? He asked all the difficult questions he encountered regarding cultivation methods and techniques. Elder Lin Fengying was indeed skilled in this aspect. A few words of advice could enlighten Jiang Li greatly. Moreover, as they conversed, Jiang Li noticed that the other party was actually an array formation master. Elder Lin also praised the wood-yin feng shui array that Jiang Li set up back then. He said that Jiang Li was absolutely talented in array formations. Back then, relying on the superficial teachings of the outer sect cultivation hall, he could use 15 ghostwood trees to set up that kind of feng shui array. His talent was definitely not ordinary. At this moment, he truly got what he needed the most. Jiang Li had been learning how to draw runes for several months already. His foundation was quite good, but he had been suffering from the fact that no one was teaching him the secrets of array formations, so he had been stagnating and not making any progress. This time, he happened to bump into Elder Lin and quickly grabbed the opportunity to get close to the other party, obtaining the promise of imparting array formation knowledge to him.